For the last time, Ambassador, Earth is not surrendering. We're giving you a chance to back off. Commander Alexander Winters leaned back in his chair, boots propped on the conference table, deliberately casual in a way that made the alien delegation's upper appendages twitch with indignation. The Hegemony Ambassador, a 7-foot-tall insectoid whose name translated roughly to "clicks with authority," chittered something that the translation matrix rendered as an exasperated sigh. "Commander, perhaps you misunderstand the gravity of your situation," the ambassador said, mandibles working furiously. "The combined hegemony controls 87% of the known galaxy. Your species has barely managed interplanetary travel. Your most advanced weaponry would be considered ceremonial artifacts in our museums." Alexander yawned theatrically. "And yet here you are, asking for our surrender instead of just taking what you want. Curious, that." The 4 other aliens in the delegation exchanged glances, their compound eyes reflecting the sterile light of the orbital station. Earth hung in the viewport behind them, a blue marble that seemed impossibly fragile against the void. "We prefer minimal casualties," the ambassador said carefully. Alexander snorted. "Right. And it has nothing to do with what happened to the Dravix fleet last month?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. The Dravix were the Hegemony's premier shock troops, a reptilian species renowned for their aggression and combat prowess. Their attempted invasion of Mars had ended with 17 of their capital ships mysteriously vanishing from sensors. No debris, no distress signals. Just gone. "A regrettable miscommunication," the ambassador said stiffly. "Uh-huh." Alexander dropped his feet to the floor and leaned forward, all pretense of casualness evaporating. "Let me make something crystal clear. Humanity isn't weak. We're holding back. There's a difference." The ambassador's translator struggled to keep up with the rapid-fire chittering that followed. "Your species has existed for a mere eye-blink of cosmic time. You still fight among yourselves over resources. Your technology is primitive, your understanding of space-time rudimentary at best." Alexander smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "You know what they used to call humans, back before we unified? The deadliest apex predator in Earth's history. We didn't get that title because we're the strongest, or the fastest, or have the sharpest claws. We got it because we're clever, Ambassador. We're adaptable, and when threatened—" His smile widened. "We get creative." The ambassador's aide whispered something urgently in their native language. "You have 24 Earth hours to reconsider your position," the ambassador said finally. "After that, the hegemony will take appropriate action." Alexander stood, straightening his uniform jacket. "We've transmitted our terms to your vessel. They're non-negotiable. You have 12 hours to accept them, or we will take appropriate action." As the delegation filed out, Admiral Zhao stepped out from the adjoining observation room, her expression grim. "That went well," she said dryly. Alexander shrugged. "They were never going to accept terms. This was just to buy us time." "Time for what, exactly?" Zhao asked, though she already knew the answer. Alexander's eyes gleamed with something ancient and predatory. "Time to take the gloves off." Fleet Captain Zrekthar of the Hegemony's 7th Expeditionary Force didn't believe in humans. Oh, he acknowledged their physical existence, the bipedal mammals occupying the 3rd planet of an unremarkable yellow star. But he didn't believe the stories, the whispered warnings, the inexplicable losses. "Superstitious nonsense," he muttered to his executive officer as they reviewed the invasion plans. The Dravix were careless. They underestimated the asteroid field's density and paid the price. "There was no debris, sir," his XO pointed out, her 4 eyes blinking in sequence. "A nervous habit. Sensor malfunction, or perhaps they deserted." Zrekthar waved a dismissive tentacle. "Either way, we won't make the same mistakes. We have 300 ships. The humans have, what, 27? 29, sir, and their vessels are unusual." Zrekthar made a gurgling sound that passed for laughter among his species. "Unusual? They're using fusion drives. Fusion, like primitive savages. Their ships don't even have proper gravity manipulation." "Yes, sir, but—" "No buts, XO. This will be a simple operation. Overwhelming force, precision strikes on their command centers, and minimal civilian casualties." He straightened to his full height, skin chromatophores shifting to project confidence. "The Hegemony Council wants this system's resources, not a prolonged conflict." His XO looked unconvinced, but knew better than to argue. Fleet Captain Zrekthar had risen through the ranks on a string of flawless victories. He'd pacified the silicon entities of Tau Ceti. He'd brought the notoriously stubborn gas-mining colonies of Epsilon Eridani to heel without firing a single shot. Humans would be no different. Just another footnote in his glorious career. "Sir," the communications officer called out. "The human delegation has returned our communication. They've rejected our terms." Zrekthar wasn't surprised. Species always resisted at first. It was part of the process. "And they've sent something else," the officer continued, sounding confused. "It appears to be music?" "Music?" Zrekthar blinked all 6 eyes in confusion. "Yes, sir. And a message. We thought you might want something to listen to before we begin. This is Wagner, Ride of the Valkyries. We've found it sets the proper mood." Before Zrekthar could respond, thunderous orchestral music blasted through the bridge's communication system. Startled officers scrambled to lower the volume, but something in the transmission was overriding their controls. And then, as the dramatic music reached a crescendo, the tactical officer shouted in alarm. "Sir, energy spike from Earth's moon, it's—" The officer never finished his sentence. A blinding beam of coherent light lanced from the lunar surface, cutting through the void with impossible speed. It struck the Hegemony's lead dreadnought with surgical precision. The massive vessel, over 2 kilometers long and protected by the most advanced shields in the galaxy, simply unraveled. There was no explosion, no debris. The ship seemed to fold in on itself, collapsing into a point of brilliant light before vanishing entirely. Stunned silence fell over the bridge, broken only by the continuing strains of Wagner. What was that?" Zrekthar whispered. His tactical officer was frantically checking readings. "Unknown, sir. The energy signature doesn't match anything in our database. It's not plasma, not laser, not particle beam." Another flash. Another dreadnought gone. "Evasive maneuvers," Zrekthar shouted, finally snapping out of his shock. "All ships, scatter formation. Return fire on that moon." But the human vessels, those primitive fusion-driven craft that had been holding position near Mars, suddenly accelerated at rates that should have liquefied any organic pilot. They moved with impossible precision, executing maneuvers that defied the laws of physics as the Hegemony understood them. And they were headed straight for the heart of the Hegemony fleet. "They've taken the bait," Lieutenant Commander Ravi Patel announced, his fingers dancing over the holographic controls of Earth's Defense Command Center. "The main Hegemony fleet is moving to engage our decoys." Alexander nodded, watching the tactical display with satisfaction. The human ships racing toward the alien fleet were empty vessels, hulls packed with technology specifically designed to confuse Hegemony sensors. Each one broadcast the life signs of a full crew, emitted the expected radiation signature of a fusion drive, and projected energy readings consistent with what the aliens expected from primitive human weaponry. In reality, Earth's actual defense force remained hidden, cloaked by technology reverse-engineered from a dozen different alien crash sites over the centuries. "And the ambassador's ship?" Admiral Zhao asked. "Still in orbit, Admiral. They're maintaining position, probably to observe the battle." Ravi's tone made the air quotes unnecessary. "Perfect." Alexander turned to the quantum communications array. "Luna Base, you are clear to proceed with Phase 2. Dr. Eleanor Wright's face appeared on the screen, her expression showing the strain of maintaining the massive lunar installation at combat readiness. "Understood, Commander. Synchronizing quantum displacement fields now." Behind her, technicians monitored a sprawling apparatus that occupied most of a lava tube beneath the lunar surface. The device, officially designated the Quantum Entanglement Nullification Generator, but colloquially known as the Eraser, was humanity's most closely guarded secret. The theory behind it was deceptively simple. If 2 particles could be quantum entangled across any distance, then manipulating one would instantaneously affect the other, regardless of the space between them. The Eraser took this principle and weaponized it on a massive scale, creating entanglement between the atoms of a target vessel and a carefully controlled singularity in Luna Base. The result? Ships didn't explode. They didn't break apart. They simply ceased to exist in normal space-time. Their component atoms scattered across dimensions humans had only begun to understand. "Targets designated," Dr. Wright reported. "Firing sequence initiated." On the tactical display, more Hegemony vessels winked out of existence. "Status of the decoys?" Alexander asked. Ravi checked his readings. 6 remaining, sir. They're taking heavy fire, but the chameleon systems are holding. The Hegemony still thinks they're engaging our actual fleet. Admiral Zhao studied the display, her experienced eye noting the increasingly erratic movements of the alien ships. "They're panicking, breaking formation. This is where it gets dangerous." She was right. A cornered enemy was unpredictable. And despite humanity's technological surprises, the hegemony still had overwhelming numbers. "Sir!" Ravi's voice sharpened. "Multiple launches detected from the hegemony vessels." Reading. "Oh hell. They're planet crackers." Alexander's blood ran cold. Planet crackers, antimatter warheads designed to destabilize a planet's core, rendering it uninhabitable for millennia. The hegemony claimed to have retired such weapons centuries ago, calling them too barbaric for civilized warfare. "Intercept course?" he demanded. "They're targeting Earth, sir." "Impact in 11 minutes. Admiral Zhao was already moving. "Activate the planetary shield. All ASAT batteries. Target those warheads." "The shield isn't ready," Ravi protested. "The southern hemisphere generators are still calibrating after the last test." Alexander made a split-second decision. "Redirect the eraser. Target those warheads." Dr. Wright's face paled. "Commander, we've never used it on objects that small. The targeting precision required is within your capabilities, Doctor." Alexander cut her off. "I have faith in your team." On the screen, Dr. Wright nodded grimly and turned to her staff, barking orders. "Luna Base adjusting targeting parameters," Ravi reported. "Anti-satellite batteries engaging. But there are too many warheads, sir. Saturation attack. They must have launched hundreds." The view screen showed Earth's defensive systems coming online. Laser arrays and kinetic interceptors firing in coordinated salvos. Dozens of the incoming warheads were vaporized or knocked off course, but dozens more kept coming. "Luna Base ready," Dr. Wright announced. "But we can only target 67 warheads in this configuration. We need to choose." Alexander stared at the tactical display, making the hardest calculation of his life. "Prioritize population centers, starting with the eastern seaboard of North America, then Europe, East Asia." The words tasted like ash in his mouth. He was choosing which parts of Earth might die. "Sir!" Ravi suddenly shouted. "New contacts! Coming in fast from the Kuiper Belt!" A new cluster of signals appeared on the tactical display, accelerating toward Earth at velocities that made even Alexander's enhanced mind struggle to calculate. "Are they hegemony reinforcements?" Admiral Zhao demanded. Ravi's hands flew over the controls. "No, ma'am. Wait, IF confirmed. They're ours. It's the Deep Space Contingent." Alexander felt a surge of desperate hope. The Deep Space Fleet, vessels designed for the extreme conditions beyond the solar system, had been on a training exercise in the Kuiper Belt when the hegemony arrived. They weren't due back for another week. "Open a channel," he ordered. The view screen shifted to show the bridge of the UES Pathfinder. Captain Dominic Reed's weathered face appeared, a grim smile on his lips. "Heard you could use some assistance, Commander." "Your timing is impeccable, Captain," Alexander replied, relief evident in his voice. "We have multiple planet crackers inbound." "So I see. Fortunately, we brought some new toys to test." Reed turned slightly. "Doctor." "Ishikawa, if you would do the honors." The camera shifted to show a Japanese woman standing before a complex apparatus that hummed with barely contained energy. "Initiating gravitational lens," she announced. "Focusing temporal displacement field." Outside Earth's atmosphere, space itself seemed to ripple. The incoming antimatter warheads suddenly slowed, as if moving through molasses. Then, one by one, they began to age. Their casings oxidizing, circuitry degrading, containment fields failing. Within seconds, the deadly weapons had deteriorated into harmless clouds of inert particles. "Temporal acceleration field," Captain Reed explained, looking rather pleased with himself. "Ages the target by about 10,000 years in a localized bubble. Quite effective against anything with complex components or unstable elements." Alexander stared at the screen. "That technology wasn't in any briefing I received." Reed's smile widened. "That's because we just finished testing it yesterday, Commander. Dr. Ishikawa is quite the genius." "I believe I speak for everyone on Earth when I say we're very glad you decided to come home early," Admiral Zhao said dryly. "Well, we picked up some unusual communications traffic. Thought we should investigate." Reed's expression hardened. "Now, shall we discuss how to deal with the rest of our unwelcome visitors?" In the observation bubble of his command ship, Ambassador Clicks with Authority watched in mounting horror as the supposedly primitive humans systematically dismantled the pride of the hegemony fleet. "Impossible," he whispered, compound eyes wide. "Their technological level was assessed at development stage 3. This is at least stage 7, possibly 8. His aide, a younger insectoid named Skitters Through Shadows, had abandoned all pretense of diplomatic poise and was frantically compiling data from the battle. "Sir, I've analyzed the weapon they're using from the moon. It appears to be manipulating quantum fields in a way our scientists theorized was impossible." Skitter's mandibles clacked anxiously. And those ships that just arrived, they're bending space-time itself. The ambassador felt his exoskeleton grow cold. The council must be informed, immediately. Sir, Skitters hesitated. Given what we're witnessing, is it possible that the humans have been concealing their true capabilities all along? That the assessment teams were deliberately misled? Before the ambassador could answer, the ship's communication system chimed. A human face appeared on the screen. Commander Winters, looking remarkably calm for someone in the midst of an interstellar conflict. Ambassador, I trust you're enjoying the show? Clicks with Authority struggled to maintain his diplomatic composure. Commander, this unprovoked attack on hegemony forces is a direct violation of interstellar law. The Council will... Let's cut the bullshit, shall we? Alexander interrupted. Your fleet just launched planet crackers at Earth. I'd say that nullifies any claim to the moral high ground you might have had. The ambassador faltered. That was not authorized. Fleet Captain Zrekthar must have acted on his own initiative. The hegemony would never sanction the use of such weapons. And yet, here we are. Alexander's expression hardened. But let's talk about something more interesting. Like why the hegemony is so desperate to control Earth that you'd risk a war you clearly weren't prepared for. The ambassador's mandibles twitched nervously. I don't know what you mean. I think you do. Alexander leaned closer to the camera. You see, we've been intercepting and decrypting your communications for decades. We know about the prophecy. The one your religious caste has been trying to keep secret from the rest of the galaxy. If an insectoid could pale, Clicks with Authority would have turned ghostly white. That's classified at the highest levels. How could you possibly? And in the final cycle, the soft ones from the blue world will either save the galaxy or burn it to ash, Alexander quoted. That's how it translates to English, more or less. Your mystics have been having visions about humans for centuries, haven't they? Long before we even achieved spaceflight. The ambassador's silence was confirmation enough. So the hegemony had two options, Alexander continued. Try to peacefully integrate humans into your galactic community, and hope we're the saviors, or eliminate the threat before it can materialize. You chose door number 2. You don't understand, the ambassador finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. The visions. They showed worlds burning, entire species extinct, a darkness spreading across the stars. With humans at the center of it all? Yes, always humans. Sometimes as the cause, sometimes as the only hope. The ambassador's compound eyes reflected the continuing destruction of the hegemony fleet. The council was divided. Some believed we should embrace humanity, guide you, help you develop without the mistakes other species made. Others wanted us gone, Alexander finished. And they won the argument. They were persuasive. They pointed to your species' history of violence, your rapid technological advancement, your unpredictability. The ambassador's gaze returned to Alexander, and now it seems they were right to be afraid. Alexander shook his head. You attacked us, Ambassador. We defended ourselves. There's a difference. Is there? Look at what you've hidden from us! Technology that our greatest scientists deemed theoretical at best. Weapons that violate the fundamental laws of physics as we understand them. We hid these things precisely because we feared this reaction. Alexander countered. Humanity spent centuries watching your ships observe our planet, monitoring your probes in our system. We intercepted enough of your communications to understand how the hegemony treats primitive species. So yes, we pretended to be less advanced than we are. We played the role you expected. The tactical display showed the last of the hegemony's capital ships vanishing, erased from existence by Luna Base's quantum weapon. The remaining vessels, mostly smaller frigates and support craft, were scattering, attempting to flee the solar system. The Council will never accept this defeat, the ambassador warned. They will return with a force 10 times this size. No, Alexander said simply. They won't. Because right now, representatives of humanity are appearing in the capital cities of every major hegemony world. They're delivering a simple message, along with proof of what happened here today. The ambassador's antennae went rigid with shock. That's impossible. Our homeworlds are hundreds of light years from here. Even with your advanced technology, you couldn't possibly... Quantum entanglement doesn't just work for weapons, Ambassador. We've had instantaneous communication and transportation capabilities for over 50 years. Alexander smiled thinly. Your leaders are currently watching the same demonstration you are. and they're receiving our terms. Terms? The ambassador echoed weakly. Simple ones. The hegemony will acknowledge Earth and all human colonies as sovereign territory. A non-aggression pact will be signed, and the hegemony will open its scientific and cultural archives to human representatives. And if the Council refuses? Alexander's expression didn't change, but something cold entered his eyes. Then we'll be forced to demonstrate that what you've seen today represents only a fraction of our capabilities. The prophecy speaks of humans potentially burning the galaxy to ash. We'd prefer not to fulfill that particular interpretation. The silence that followed was broken only by Skitter's anxious clicking. I will convey your terms to the Council, the ambassador finally said, his voice hollow with defeat. Excellent. Alexander's tone softened slightly. For what it's worth, Ambassador, I believe there's a third interpretation of your prophecy. One where humans neither save the galaxy nor destroy it, but simply help it evolve. Change is frightening, especially to an empire that's grown comfortable with stagnation. But it's also necessary. The ambassador considered this. And if the prophecy is true? If humans are destined to bring darkness to the stars? Then trying to exterminate us was the worst possible move, Alexander replied. Because now we'll always be watching our backs. The communication ended, leaving the ambassador staring at the empty screen. Sir? Skitters ventured after a long moment. What do we do now? Clicks with authority turned to gaze out at Earth, the blue planet now surrounded by the remnants of what had been the hegemony's finest fleet. In the space of a few hours, centuries of assumptions about humanity had been shattered. The galaxy had fundamentally changed. We adapt, the ambassador said quietly, or we perish. 3 months later, Alexander stood in the newly constructed Interspecies Diplomatic Center in Geneva, adjusting the collar of his dress uniform. The chamber around him was filled with representatives from 24 alien species, most members of the hegemony, but a few independent worlds as well. All had come to witness the historic signing of the Earth Hegemony Accord. Nervous? Admiral Zhao asked, appearing at his side with 2 glasses of champagne. Alexander accepted one gratefully. Just thinking about how close we came to a very different outcome. If the Deep Space Fleet hadn't returned early, or if we hadn't had the eraser ready. They both fell silent, contemplating the narrow margin that had separated Earth's victory from potential devastation. Have you met the new ambassador yet? Zhao asked, changing the subject. Alexander nodded. Briefly, skitters through shadows, young, progressive, apparently advocated for peaceful contact with humanity from the beginning. Smart move by the Council, sending someone who was on the right side of history. Politics is politics, regardless of species. Alexander took a sip of champagne. Speaking of which, how are the integration efforts going? Admiral Zhao grimaced slightly. About as well as you'd expect. Half of Earth's governments want immediate access to all hegemony technology. The other half are paranoid that alien influence will undermine human culture, the usual. And the military contingent? Split along similar lines. Some want to use our technological advantage to establish human dominance across the sector. Others argue for restraint, for using our leverage to reform the hegemony from within. Alexander nodded thoughtfully. And where do you stand, Admiral? Zhao considered the question. I think we need to be careful. The technology we've developed in isolation, the quantum weapons, the temporal fields, they're powerful, yes. But they also evolved without the ethical frameworks that guided other species' development. You think we're dangerous? I think we proved we're dangerous. That was the whole point. She met his gaze evenly. The question now is whether we can be dangerous and wise simultaneously. Before Alexander could respond, a hush fell over the chamber as the hegemony's High Counselor entered, a massive, gelatinous entity whose translucent body pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. Flanking the counselor were representatives from the hegemony's founding species, including the insectoids, the reptilian Dravix, and several others Alexander didn't immediately recognize. Showtime, he murmured, setting aside his glass. The ceremony itself was mercifully brief. Speeches were made, documents were signed, both physically and through various species-specific rituals, and history was officially rewritten. No mention was made of the battle that had precipitated this new era of cooperation. The hegemony representatives spoke of mutual respect and cultural exchange, as if they hadn't attempted to annihilate humanity 3 months earlier. Politics, as Admiral Zhao had said, transcended species boundaries. After the formalities concluded, Alexander found himself approached by an unexpected figure, Fleet Captain Zrekthar, one of the few survivors of the hegemony's failed invasion. The tentacled alien looked diminished somehow, his skin chromatophores muted in coloration. "Commander Winters," Zrekthar said, his translator rendering his gurgling speech into precise English. "I did not expect to see you here." "I could say the same for you, Captain," Alexander replied carefully. "I understood most of your fleet was lost in the incident." "Most, yes. My vessel was on the periphery when the retreat was called." Zrekthar's tentacles writhed in what might have been discomfort. "I have been reassigned to cultural affairs." Alexander suppressed a smile. A military demotion disguised as a diplomatic posting. Some things truly were universal. "May I speak candidly, Commander?" Zrekthar asked, lowering his voice. "Of course. The weapons you used against my fleet, they violated principles of physics we believe to be immutable. The Council is claiming publicly that they've known of such technologies for centuries, that they were simply restricted. But that's a lie." Zrekthar's 4 primary eyes fixed on Alexander. How did humans develop such capabilities in isolation, without access to the combined knowledge of thousands of species? It was a question Alexander had been expecting, though not from this particular source. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "it's because we developed in isolation that we found different paths. Your species, all the hegemony species, evolved within a framework of shared knowledge. When one approach became standard, alternatives were abandoned. And humans? Humans have always been stubborn. When told something is impossible, our first instinct is to try anyway." Alexander smiled slightly. "Sometimes we fail. Sometimes we discover the conventional wisdom was wrong." Zrekthar absorbed this. "The Council fears what other technologies you might be concealing." "We're not concealing anything that isn't covered by the Accord," Alexander replied smoothly. "Though I'd point out that the hegemony certainly kept a few secrets of its own. Planet crackers, for instance." The alien had the grace to look embarrassed, his skin flushing a deep purple. "A regrettable decision, made in panic." "Indeed." Alexander decided to change the subject. "I understand you'll be among the first exchange delegation to Earth." "Yes, I am to learn about human culture, share knowledge of the wider galaxy." Zrekthar's tentacles twisted in what might have been a sigh. "It is a far cry from fleet command. Consider it an opportunity, Captain. Few in the hegemony will have the chance to understand humans as you will." "Perhaps." The alien seemed unconvinced. "Though I suspect I am being sent to be watched as much as to watch." A chime sounded, indicating the reception was continuing in an adjacent hall. As they moved with the crowd, Zrekthar spoke again, his voice lowered. "The prophecy, is it true that you know of it?" Alexander nodded slightly. "We've intercepted enough transmissions to piece it together." "Then you know it is not complete. What was shared publicly is only a fragment." This caught Alexander's attention. "Oh?" Zrekthar's voice dropped even further. "The full text speaks not just of salvation or destruction, but of transformation. The soft ones will remake the stars in their image, and nothing will remain as it was." Alexander felt a chill run down his spine. "And what do you think that means, Captain?" "I think," Zrekthar said slowly, "that the Council's fear was never really about human weapons or aggression. It was about human ideas. Your species adapts so quickly, changes so readily. You embrace transformation where most species seek stability." It was an astute observation, one that aligned with thoughts Alexander had harbored since childhood. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their military prowess. It was their adaptability. Their willingness to evolve, to become something new when circumstances demanded it. "An interesting theory," Alexander said neutrally. "More than a theory, Commander." Zrekthar gestured subtly toward a group of diplomats, a mix of humans and various alien species engaged in animated conversation. "Already it begins, ideas flowing between worlds, perspectives shifting. The hegemony has stood unchanged for 12,000 years. Then humans arrive, and in a single season, everything is different." Before Alexander could respond, Admiral Zhao appeared at his elbow. "Commander, we're needed in the secure communication room. There's a situation developing in the Proxima system." Alexander nodded to Zrekthar. "If you'll excuse me, Captain. It seems duty calls." "Of course." The alien dipped in what might have been a bow. "But consider what I've said, Commander. The true war, the one that will determine the future of the galaxy, it is not fought with weapons. It is fought with ideas." As Alexander followed Admiral Zhao through the crowded reception, He found himself turning the alien's words over in his mind. Perhaps the prophecy was right after all. Perhaps humans would transform the galaxy, not through conquest but through the simple, inexorable force of their restless nature. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. In the secure communication room, Dr. Eleanor Wright's hologram awaited them, her expression tense. "We've detected unusual energy signatures near Proxima Centauri b," she reported without preamble. "Pattern matches the theoretical models for hegemony stealth technology. The ink isn't even dry on the Accord, and they're already moving against our colonies." Admiral Zhao's expression darkened. "Not necessarily," Alexander cautioned. "They could be observation posts established before the agreement, or independent actors not under council control. Either way, we need to respond," Zhao insisted. Alexander nodded thoughtfully. "Agreed. But let's be smart about this. If the hegemony is testing us, let's show them we're watching without escalating." "What do you suggest?" Dr. Wright asked. "Deploy the new sensor grid, the one using quantum entanglement to bypass normal light speed limitations. Let's see exactly what they're doing without alerting them to our presence." Admiral Zhao looked skeptical. "And if they are preparing for hostilities?" "Then we remind them what happened the last time they underestimated us," Alexander said simply, but diplomatically. A ghost of a smile touched Zhao's lips. "Diplomatically threatening extinction. You've come a long way from that cocky commander who put his boots on the conference table." "I still have my moments," Alexander assured her with a grin. "But I'm learning that sometimes the most effective threat is the one you don't have to make explicitly." As they began coordinating the response to this potential new crisis, Alexander found himself thinking again of Zrekthar's words. The war of ideas had already begun. And despite the Accord, despite the handshakes and speeches, humanity and the hegemony were still feeling their way toward an uneasy coexistence. The galaxy was changing. Humanity was the catalyst. And whether that change led to a new golden age or interstellar conflict would depend on what happened in the coming months and years. One thing was certain: Earth had shown its teeth. The galaxy now knew that humans had been holding back. And if threatened again, there would be no mercy. But perhaps, just perhaps, there could be understanding instead. 3 days later, Alexander stood on the observation deck of the orbital station, watching Earth rotate slowly beneath him. The lights of cities glittered across the night side, patterns of human civilization etched in luminescence against the darkness. "Beautiful, isn't it?" a voice said behind him. He turned to find Skitters through shadows, the new hegemony ambassador, stepping onto the deck. The young insectoid moved with a nervous energy that reminded Alexander of a caffeinated graduate student. "It is," Alexander agreed. "Though I imagine it looks quite different through compound eyes. More facets, certainly. But beauty transcends biological perception, I think." Skitters moved to stand beside him at the viewport. "I've been studying human art since my appointment. Fascinating how much of it focuses on your homeworld. We're sentimental about it. It's the only one we evolved on, after all." "Most species feel similarly about their birth worlds," Skitters agreed, "though few have gone to the lengths humans have to protect theirs." There was a question embedded in the statement. Alexander chose to address it directly. "You're wondering about Proxima Centauri?" The insectoid's antennae twitched in surprise. "You know about the Council's probe?" "We detected it shortly after the signing ceremony. 3 stealth observation platforms in orbit around Proxima b." "I see." Skitters seemed to be choosing his words carefully. "And you did not destroy them?" Alexander shrugged. "They're observing an uninhabited planet, gathering scientific data, hardly an act of war. Most species would consider any unauthorized presence in their claimed system to be provocative." "Perhaps we're more confident in our position than most," Alexander replied. "We know the platforms are there. We're monitoring them. And we've allowed them to remain as a gesture of goodwill." Skitter's mandibles clicked in what Alexander had come to recognize as the insectoid equivalent of a thoughtful hum. An interesting approach. The Council expected retaliation. "I know. That's precisely why we didn't provide it." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching as the Terminator line crept across Europe, darkness giving way to dawn. "May I ask you something, Commander?" Skitters finally said. "Of course. The technology you revealed during the conflict, was that truly the extent of humanity's capabilities?" Alexander smiled slightly. "What do you think, Ambassador?" "I think," Skitters said carefully, "that a species wise enough to hide its true nature for centuries would be wise enough to continue hiding some aspects of it, even after revealing others. A reasonable assumption. Then I must also assume that you have contingencies in place, safeguards, in case the Accord fails. Alexander turned to face the alien directly. Ambassador, let me be perfectly clear. Humanity doesn't want war with the hegemony, or anyone else. We want to explore the stars, to learn, to grow. But yes, his eyes hardened slightly. We have contingencies. More than you can imagine. Skitter's compound eyes reflected the Earth's blue glow. The Council fears what those contingencies might be. Good, Alexander said simply. Fear is a powerful motivator for peace. As is hope, Skitters countered, which is why I've come to discuss the joint research initiative mentioned in the Accord. This was a topic Alexander had been expecting. The Accord included provisions for shared scientific endeavors, carefully controlled exchanges of knowledge that would, theoretically, benefit both humanity and the hegemony. I've reviewed the initial proposal, Alexander said. Terraforming techniques for marginally habitable worlds, an area where the hegemony has extensive experience. Yes, and in exchange, the Council is interested in human insights into quantum entanglement, particularly as it relates to communication. Not weapons, Alexander noted, at least not explicitly, but quantum communication was the foundation upon which many of humanity's more advanced technologies were built. That's a significant request, he said neutrally. The Council believes it represents an equivalent exchange. Terraforming technology could allow humanity to colonize dozens of additional systems within your exploration range. True. But quantum entanglement communication would give the hegemony instantaneous contact across thousands of light years, a considerable strategic advantage. Skitter's antennae drooped slightly. You still think in terms of strategic advantages and disadvantages? The Accord was meant to move us beyond such calculations. Was it? Alexander raised an eyebrow. Or was it meant to establish new rules for the same old game? The insectoid had no immediate response to that. Look, Alexander continued in a gentler tone. I'm not rejecting the proposal outright, but true cooperation requires trust, and trust takes time to build. Why not start with something less sensitive? Medical technologies, perhaps, or renewable energy systems. The Council was quite specific about their interest, Skitters insisted. I'm sure they were. Alexander turned back to the viewport. Tell them we'll consider it, but also tell them that trust goes both ways. Those observation platforms around Proxima B, they're not just gathering scientific data, are they? Skitter's sudden stillness was answer enough. That's what I thought, Alexander said quietly. You can't expect us to share our most advanced communication technology while you're actively spying on our colonies. It's complicated, Skitters finally admitted. The Council is divided. Some factions accepted the Accord reluctantly, and they're pushing for insurance. Insurance, Alexander repeated. Like weapons platforms disguised as observation posts? The ambassador's silence was damning. Alexander sighed. Remove them, publicly. Show us that the hegemony is committed to the Accord in deed as well as word. Then we can discuss quantum entanglement technology. The Council will not be pleased. No, I don't imagine they will be. But peace isn't built on what's pleasing. It's built on what's necessary. Skitters seemed to consider this for a long moment before straightening to his full height. I will convey your position, Commander, and for what it's worth, I agree with your assessment. Trust must be earned. As the ambassador turned to leave, Alexander called after him. One more thing, Ambassador. That prophecy your people are so concerned about? The one about humans either saving the galaxy or burning it to ash? Skitters paused. Yes? Maybe it's not about what humans will do to the galaxy. Maybe it's about what the galaxy chooses to do with humans. The insectoid's antennae twitched thoughtfully. An interesting interpretation. I shall add it to the theological debate. After Skitters had gone, Alexander remained at the viewport, his reflection ghostly against the backdrop of Earth. The next few months would be critical. The hegemony was testing boundaries, probing for weaknesses, trying to determine just how much of humanity's power had been revealed and how much remained hidden. It was a dangerous game, but one humanity had been preparing for since the first alien crash site was discovered in New Mexico back in 1947, the incident that had accelerated human technological development and prepared them for this moment. His communication implant chimed softly. Commander, Admiral Zhao's voice said directly into his auditory nerve. We've received the preliminary analysis from Proxima. And? Definitely weapons platforms. Disguised, but our quantum scans picked up antimatter signatures. Alexander nodded, though the Admiral couldn't see him. Not unexpected. Options? We could destroy them remotely. The lunar installation has the range. No, let's see if the hegemony removes them voluntarily first. It'll be a good test of their sincerity. And if they don't? Alexander watched as the International Space Elevator came into view, its impossibly thin carbon nanotube tether stretching from equatorial Kenya into geostationary orbit. Another primitive technology humanity had allowed the hegemony to observe, while keeping the more advanced gravitational manipulation systems carefully hidden. If they don't, he said quietly, then we'll need to reconsider our approach to galactic diplomacy. Understood, Commander. The Admiral hesitated. There's one more thing. Dr. Wright says the signal has changed again. Alexander felt a chill run down his spine. In what way? Frequency shift, moving deeper into the ultra-low band. She says it's consistent with the pattern we've been tracking for the past decade. I'll be right there. The signal. The reason humanity had accelerated its technological development so dramatically over the past century. The reason Earth had united despite its historical divisions. The reason they had been prepared when the hegemony arrived. An ultra-low frequency transmission emanating from the direction of the galactic core. Nearly undetectable, except to the quantum-entangled receivers humanity had developed specifically to listen for it. A signal that had been gradually, inexorably changing in ways that suggested intelligence and purpose. A signal that, according to humanity's best xenolinguists, was counting down. The quantum monitoring station was buried 2 kilometers beneath the Antarctic ice sheet, isolated from external interference and protected from all but the most determined orbital strikes. Alexander's private shuttle descended through a concealed shaft, landing in a hangar that had never appeared on any official blueprint. Dr. Eleanor Wright met him at the security checkpoint, her usual crisp demeanor showing signs of strain. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and she clutched a tablet computer like a lifeline. It shifted again, she said without preamble, as they walked briskly through sterile white corridors. 3 hours ago, the pattern's accelerating. Show me. They entered a circular chamber dominated by a holographic display of the Milky Way galaxy. At its center, pulsing gently, was a representation of the signal, a writhing strand of light that seemed to coil in on itself in impossible ways. We've been tracking it for 26 years, Dr. Wright said, manipulating controls to highlight the changes. Initially, the shifts occurred approximately once every 14 months, then once every 12, then 10. She looked up at Alexander. The last 3 shifts have occurred within 8 weeks of each other. And the countdown? Dr. Wright's expression was grim. If our translation matrix is correct, and that's still a significant if, then whatever the signal is counting down to will occur within the next 18 months. Any progress on determining what it is? Nothing definitive. The contextual markers suggest some kind of arrival or emergence. She hesitated. Or possibly an awakening. Alexander studied the pulsing signal thoughtfully. And we're still the only ones who've detected it? As far as we know. The hegemony's communication technology isn't sophisticated enough to pick up something this subtle. At least, not according to what we've seen of their capabilities. And the source? Dr. Wright manipulated the controls again, zooming in on the galactic core, a dense cluster of stars surrounding the supermassive black hole at the center of the Milky Way. Still impossible to pinpoint exactly. The signal seems to be coming from multiple locations simultaneously, which shouldn't be possible unless it's using the same quantum entanglement principles we've developed. Alexander finished. Exactly, which raises some uncomfortable questions about who or what might be sending it. The implications hung in the air between them. If some entity had developed quantum entanglement communication, it was either far more advanced than humanity, or had been the source from which humanity had reverse-engineered the technology in the first place. Have you shared this with the Oversight Committee? Alexander asked. Not yet. I wanted your assessment first. Alexander studied the display, watching as the signal pulsed in its hypnotic rhythm. For 26 years, this had been humanity's most closely guarded secret. More classified than the lunar weapons platform, more sensitive than the temporal displacement technology. Because unlike those innovations, which had been developed through human ingenuity, albeit accelerated by studying crashed alien craft, the signal was something else entirely. Something external. Something that had been reaching out to Earth for reasons they still didn't understand. We need to accelerate the defensive preparations, he said finally. If something is coming, or awakening, or whatever, In 18 months, we need to be ready. And the hegemony? The accord? Alexander's expression hardened. We maintain the diplomatic approach for now. Push for real cooperation where possible. But we don't share anything related to the signal or our quantum technologies. And we quietly prepare for the possibility that the accord is just a temporary measure. Dr. Wright nodded, though she looked troubled. Commander, do you ever wonder if we're being paranoid? If the signal might be benevolent? It was a question Alexander had asked himself many times over the years. The signal had never shown any overtly hostile characteristics. It had never attempted to influence Earth's technology or society directly. It was simply there, counting down. I hope it is benevolent, he said honestly. But hope isn't a strategy. And if there's one thing humanity has learned from its own history, it's that it's better to be prepared for threats that never materialize than unprepared for ones that do. Dr. Wright didn't look entirely convinced, but she nodded. I'll update the translation team, see if we can extract any more information from the latest shift. Good. And Eleanor? Alexander hesitated. Let's keep this limited to the core team for now. The fewer people who know about the acceleration, the better. Understood, Commander. As Alexander left the monitoring station, his thoughts were turbulent. The situation with the hegemony was complex enough, a delicate dance of diplomacy backed by the implicit threat of Earth's revealed capabilities. Adding the mystery of the signal and its accelerating countdown made the galactic chessboard even more complicated. And somewhere in the back of his mind, Zrekthar's words echoed. The true war, the one that will determine the future of the galaxy. It is not fought with weapons. It is fought with ideas. What idea, Alexander wondered, might be powerful enough to transform the galaxy? And was humanity its vector or its target? The Hegemony Council chamber on Zalaxis Prime was a marvel of biological architecture. Walls of living coral pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, responding to the emotional states of the 23 representatives seated around the central deliberation pool. Currently, those patterns were flashing in agitated rhythms of crimson and amber, visual evidence of the heated debate taking place. Unacceptable! Thundered Councillor Dravkosh, the massive reptilian slamming a clawed fist onto the table. The humans have detected our defensive measures around Proxima Centauri and have the audacity to demand their removal? This is precisely why we should have eliminated them when we had the chance. Skitters through shadows maintained a posture of diplomatic calm, though his inner eyelids flickered nervously. The humans did not demand, honored Counselor. They suggested that the removal of the platforms would be a gesture of good faith that might facilitate more productive discussions regarding technology exchange. A distinction without a difference, scoffed High Minister Quarlox, her gelatinous form rippling with indignation. They know our platforms are there, which means they have surveillance capabilities far beyond what they claimed in the Accord negotiations. Or perhaps, suggested Elder Zoran, the eldest of the Council, they simply noticed our ships deploying the platforms. We were not particularly subtle about it. The method of detection is irrelevant, Dravkosh insisted. What matters is that these primitives, these humans, are dictating terms to the hegemony as if we were some minor client species. It cannot stand. Skitters felt a ripple of frustration. 3 standard cycles had passed since the disastrous attempt to subjugate Earth, and still most of the Council refused to acknowledge the reality of the situation. They clung to the comfortable fiction that humans were primitives, who had simply gotten lucky, rather than facing the uncomfortable truth, that humanity had outpaced the hegemony in several critical technological domains. Honored Counselors, he said carefully, I believe we must consider the broader strategic picture. The humans have demonstrated capabilities that our science had deemed theoretical at best. They effectively neutralized a fleet of 300 vessels without suffering significant losses. They have faster-than-light communication technology that would revolutionize hegemony operations across the galaxy. All the more reason to crush them now before they can develop further, Dravkosh growled. With what force? Skitters challenged, his patience finally fraying. The fleet we sent was among our most powerful, and it was defeated in hours. Our military analysts still don't fully understand the weapons the humans employed. We could send 1,000 ships to be erased from existence like the others? Skitter's antennae quivered with emotion. Honored Counselors, I have spent time among the humans. I have spoken with their leaders, observed their technologies. They are not the primitive savages our initial assessment suggested. You sound like you admire them, Ambassador, High Minister Quarlox said, her tone dangerously sweet. I respect their capabilities, Skitters corrected, and I believe the prophecies we have long feared may indeed be coming to pass. but not necessarily in the way we anticipated. A hush fell over the chamber at the mention of the prophecies. For millennia, the religious caste of the hegemony had preserved visions of a species called the Soft Ones, who would either save the galaxy or reduce it to ash. When humanity was discovered, their biological classification as soft-skinned mammals had sent ripples of alarm through the highest levels of hegemony leadership. "Explain yourself, Ambassador," Elder Zoran prompted, his ancient voice rasping with curiosity. "The prophecies speak of transformation," Skitters said, "of a fundamental change to the galactic order. We assumed this meant destruction, the end of the hegemony, the collapse of civilization. But what if it simply means evolution, growth, a new paradigm?" "Heresy," hissed one of the religious caste representatives. "Perhaps," Skitters acknowledged. "Or perhaps a more accurate interpretation than we have allowed ourselves to consider." High Minister Quarlox's form rippled with agitation. "You propose we simply accept these humans as equals? Allow them to spread their influence unchecked?" "I propose we accept reality," Skitters replied firmly. "The humans possess technology we want. We possess knowledge and resources they desire. Cooperation benefits both species far more than conflict." "And the weapons platforms at Proxima Centauri," Dravkosh demanded, "should be removed, as the humans suggested. They know the platforms are there. They have chosen not to destroy them as a show of good faith. We should reciprocate." The council chamber erupted in multiple conversations, the coral walls pulsing with chaotic patterns of color. Elder Zoran raised a withered appendage, gradually restoring order. "The ambassador's assessment has merit," the ancient being said slowly. "Our attempt at military subjugation failed. Our understanding of human capabilities was flawed. Perhaps a new approach is warranted." "You cannot be serious, Elder," Dravkosh protested. "I am always serious, Counselor," Zoran replied with a hint of acid. "I have seen the hegemony weather many crises over my long life. We have survived by adapting when necessary. This may be such a time." The chamber fell silent as the council members considered the elder's words. No one, not even the militant Dravkosh, would openly contradict one who had served on the council for over 300 cycles. "What precisely are you suggesting?" High Minister Quarlox finally asked. "A genuine adherence to the accord," Zoran said simply. "Remove the weapons platforms. Engage in good faith negotiations for technology exchange, and—" The elder hesitated. "Perhaps review the complete prophecies again, with fresh eyes." Skitters felt a surge of hope. Elder Zoran's support was unexpected, but could shift the council's position significantly. "I move that we vote on the elder's proposal," he said quickly, before opposition could coalesce. The vote was close, 12 in favor, 11 opposed, but it was enough. The council would remove the weapons platforms and proceed with genuine negotiations. As the session adjourned, Skitters found himself approached by Elder Zoran, the ancient being moving with surprising grace for one of his age. "A bold stance, young ambassador," Zoran commented, his multifaceted eyes gleaming with something that might have been amusement. "Thank you for your support, Elder," Skitters replied, dipping in respect. "It was unexpected." "Was it?" Zoran's antennae twitched. "I have studied the humans extensively since their discovery. They are fascinating creatures, so brief in their individual lives, yet so persistent as a species, so fractious among themselves, yet capable of remarkable unity when threatened." "You sound like you admire them as well," Skitters observed cautiously. "I recognize their potential," the elder corrected, "as should all who wish the hegemony to survive the coming changes." He leaned closer, voice dropping. "The complete prophecies speak not only of transformation, young one. They speak of something greater approaching. Something ancient, awakening after eons of slumber." Skitters felt his exoskeleton grow cold. "I'm not familiar with that aspect of the texts." "Few are. The religious caste has kept certain passages restricted to the highest initiates." Zoran's eyes seemed to look through Skitters, seeing something distant. "The soft ones are not the threat, Ambassador. They are the harbingers. Or perhaps, the shield." Before Skitters could ask for clarification, the elder moved away, leaving the young ambassador staring after him in confusion and growing unease. Back on Earth, Dr. Eleanor Wright stared at her screen in disbelief, checking and rechecking her calculations. It couldn't be right. The pattern didn't make sense. Unless... Run the comparative analysis again, she ordered her assistant. And this time include the historical data from before the first detected signal. Before. The young researcher looked confused. But there was no signal before 26 years ago. That's when we first detected it. Just do it. Eleanor said, more sharply than she'd intended. And extend the pattern projection forward as well. I want to see where this is going, not just where it's been. As her team scrambled to comply, Eleanor paced the monitoring chamber, her mind racing. The signal's accelerating countdown had been concerning enough, but the latest shift had revealed something even more troubling. A pattern within the pattern, a secondary rhythm that had initially seemed like background noise, until she'd recognized it from somewhere else entirely. The holographic display flickered as new data was fed into the system. The galactic map zoomed out, then further still, until the Milky Way was just one galaxy among many in the local cluster. Then time itself became a variable, with markers indicating the estimated age of various cosmic structures. And there it was, unmistakable once you knew what to look for. "My God," whispered her assistant. "Is that—" "Yes," Eleanor confirmed, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "The expansion rate of the universe. But not just any expansion rate. The display showed the current accelerating expansion, the phenomenon cosmologists had named dark energy centuries ago, for lack of a better understanding. Except the signal's pattern wasn't just matching the current rate. It was predicting changes, acceleration, spikes of expansion that, according to all known physics, shouldn't be possible. "Get me Commander Winters," Eleanor said quietly. "Now." When Alexander arrived an hour later, Eleanor had refined her analysis further. She walked him through it methodically, highlighting the correlations, explaining the implications. "So the signal isn't just counting down," Alexander said slowly. "It's— what? Predicting cosmic expansion events?" "Not predicting," Eleanor corrected. "I think it's announcing them, or possibly causing them." Alexander stared at her. "You're suggesting that whatever is generating this signal can manipulate the expansion rate of the universe itself?" "The data supports that conclusion." Eleanor pulled up another display. "Look at these spikes. They correlate perfectly with unexplained astronomical phenomena we've observed over the past 2 decades. The disappearance of GNZ-11, the sudden red shifting of the Bota's void, the gamma ray bursts from Sagittarius A. Those were all attributed to natural phenomena." "Because we had no better explanation," Eleanor countered. "But viewed through the lens of the signal's pattern, they form a coherent sequence. Something is systematically altering the fabric of space-time, Commander, and it's accelerating." Alexander was silent for a long moment, absorbing the implications. "The countdown. If I'm right, it's leading to a massive expansion event, possibly large enough to tear the local galaxy cluster apart from the rest of the universe. Creating a— what? A separate bubble of space-time?" Eleanor nodded grimly. "Essentially, yes. A pocket universe, isolated from the rest." "Why?" Alexander demanded. "What purpose would that serve?" "I don't know," Eleanor admitted. "But whatever is generating the signal clearly operates on a scale beyond our comprehension. Maybe it's a protective measure. Maybe it's preparation for something else entirely." Alexander stared at the holographic display, watching as the predicted expansion event bloomed outward from the galactic core, engulfing the Milky Way and its nearest neighbors in a bubble of accelerated space-time. "How certain are you about this?" "The mathematical correlation is undeniable," Eleanor said. "The interpretation is less certain, but it's the best explanation for the data we have." Alexander's mind was racing. If Eleanor was right, then humanity was facing something far beyond a conflict with the hegemony, something cosmic in scale, potentially existential in nature. "Does this change your estimate of the timeline?" Eleanor shook her head. 18 months still looks correct, but— She hesitated. "There's something else. The signal isn't just emanating from the galactic core anymore. We're detecting echoes, reflections, almost like it's being amplified." "From where?" "That's the strange part. Some appear to be coming from hegemony space, others from regions we haven't explored. And one—" She manipulated the controls, highlighting a point much closer to home. "One is coming from just beyond the Kuiper Belt." Alexander felt a chill run down his spine. "Inside our solar system?" "Just barely, but yes." "How long has it been there?" "That's just it," Eleanor said, frustration evident in her voice. "We don't know. Our detection algorithms were calibrated to look toward the galactic core. We only found this echo because we expanded the search parameters after the latest shift. We need to investigate," Alexander decided. "Immediately." "I agree. But, Commander—" Eleanor met his gaze directly. "If there's something out there, at the edge of our solar system, responding to or amplifying the signal, then everything changes," Alexander finished grimly. Our assumptions about the signal, about our place in the galaxy. Everything. As they discussed deployment options for a reconnaissance mission, neither noticed the subtle change in the signal's rhythm. A slight modulation that, if they had been watching, might have seemed almost like recognition, as if it knew it had been understood at last. In the Interspecies Diplomatic Center in Geneva, Alexander sat across from Ambassador Skitters through shadows, both of them flanked by their respective advisors. The atmosphere was tense but not hostile, a marked improvement from their earlier encounters. "The weapons platforms have been removed from Proxima Centauri," Skitters announced without preamble. "As a gesture of good faith, precisely as you suggested." "The Earth Defense Force confirms this," Alexander acknowledged with a nod. "We appreciate the Hegemony's commitment to the Accord. The Council has also authorized me to proceed with technology exchange negotiations," Skitters continued, "specifically regarding terraforming techniques that could benefit human colonization efforts." "Excellent. And in return?" Skitter's antennae twitched, a sign of nervousness Alexander had learned to recognize. "The Council still expresses interest in quantum entanglement communication technology. However, they understand this may require additional trust-building measures." "A diplomatic way of saying they know we're not ready to share our most advanced technology," Alexander noted with a slight smile. "Essentially, yes." Skitter seemed to hesitate. "There is another matter I've been authorized to discuss, of a more sensitive nature." Alexander gestured for the human advisors to leave the room. After a moment's consideration, Skitters did the same with his aides. When they were alone, the insectoid leaned forward, voice lowered despite the room's secure status. "The Hegemony has detected unusual energetic phenomena emanating from the galactic core," he said without preamble. "Our scientists are concerned." Alexander kept his expression carefully neutral, though his heart rate spiked. "What kind of phenomena?" "Tachyon bursts, gravitational anomalies, patterns that suggest—" Skitters seemed to struggle for words. "Intelligence, purpose. I see." Alexander's mind raced. The Hegemony had detected the signal, or at least aspects of it. That changed everything. "How long have you been aware of these phenomena?" "They were first detected approximately 26 of your years ago," Skitters admitted. "Initially, they were dismissed as natural cosmic events, but recent changes in the pattern have prompted reconsideration." 26 years, the same time frame as humanity's detection of the signal. Either both species had detected it simultaneously using different methods, or there had been some cosmic event that made the signal more detectable to both civilizations at the same time. "And why share this information now?" Alexander asked, keeping his tone conversational. "Because the phenomena appear to be accelerating," Skitters said bluntly. "And because certain ancient texts in the Hegemony's archives make reference to similar events occurring roughly every 7 million years. That was new information, and potentially crucial." "What do these texts say happens after these events?" "They are fragmentary, incomplete, but they speak of the Great Filtering." Skitter's compound eyes fixed on Alexander. "A time when the worthy are preserved and the rest are removed." "Removed how?" "The texts are unclear, but they suggest a separation, a division of the galaxy into those chosen to continue and those left behind." The description matched Eleanor's theory about a cosmic expansion event that would isolate part of the local galaxy cluster. Alexander felt a chill of validation and dread. "I'm curious," he said carefully, "why the Hegemony would share this information with us, especially given our recent difficulties." Skitter's antennae drooped slightly. "Because the prophecies I mentioned before, the ones about the soft ones, they're connected to these events. They suggest that humans might play a crucial role in what's coming. As saviors or destroyers," Alexander recalled. "Or perhaps as something else entirely," Skitters said. "The Elder, Zoran. He suggested to me that humans might be a shield, a defense against whatever the Great Filtering entails." Alexander leaned back, considering the implications. If the Hegemony believed humans might be instrumental in surviving some cosmic catastrophe, it would explain their sudden willingness to cooperate after centuries of expansionist aggression. "And what does the Hegemony want from Earth regarding these phenomena?" "Information, primarily," Skitters said. "Has humanity detected these signals? Have your scientists developed any theories about their nature or purpose? And—" the insectoid hesitated. "Have you detected any unusual structures or artifacts in your territory that might be responding to these signals?" The question was too specific to be coincidental. Either the hegemony was fishing for information, or they had detected similar artifacts in their own territory. That's a very particular inquiry, Ambassador, Alexander observed neutrally. Skitter's mandibles clicked in what might have been embarrassment. The hegemony has discovered certain anomalous structures in several star systems under our protection. Ancient constructs that appear to have recently become active after millions of years of dormancy. Alexander kept his expression carefully neutral, though his pulse quickened. Active in what way? Emitting tachyon bursts, manipulating local space-time, responding to the signals from the galactic core. Skitters leaned forward. Commander, these artifacts predate the hegemony. They predate all known civilizations in our records. We have no idea who built them or why. And you think humans might have encountered similar structures? It wasn't a question, but Skitters answered anyway. The prophecies suggest it. And the insectoid hesitated. There are references in our oldest archives to the species that preceded us, the ones who first unified the galaxy before mysteriously vanishing. They left warnings about the architects who sleep beyond time. Poetic, Alexander commented, buying time to think. Perhaps, but these structures are very real, and potentially very dangerous. Skitter's compound eyes fixed on Alexander. Commander, I believe we are facing something that transcends our species' differences. Something that threatens both humanity and the hegemony alike. It was the opening Alexander had been waiting for. A genuine common threat that could unite former enemies. But revealing humanity's knowledge of the signal and the gateway at the edge of the solar system would mean exposing their most closely guarded secrets. I need to consult with Earth's leadership, he said finally. This information changes the strategic landscape significantly. Of course. Skitters rose to leave, then paused. Commander, there is one more thing. A personal observation, not an official hegemony position. Go on. These artifacts we've discovered, some appear to be damaged, deliberately sabotaged, as if... The insectoid seemed to struggle for words, as if someone in the ancient past tried to prevent their activation. With that cryptic remark, the ambassador departed, leaving Alexander alone with thoughts more turbulent than ever. The deep space vessel UES Pathfinder slipped silently through the void beyond Neptune's orbit, its advanced stealth systems rendering it virtually undetectable to all but the most sophisticated sensors. In the ship's command center, Captain Dominic Reed studied the preliminary scans with growing unease. Definitely artificial, he reported to the quantum-linked communication system that connected him directly to Earth Defense Command. Structure approximately 2 kilometers in diameter, composed of... well, we're not entirely sure. Our materials analysis is being scattered by some kind of energy field. Can you get visual confirmation? Alexander's voice came through with perfect clarity, despite the billions of kilometers separating them. Negative. Whatever it is, it's not reflecting light in the visible spectrum. We only detected it through gravitational anomalies and tachyon emissions. There was a pause as Alexander presumably consulted with Dr. Wright. Tachyon emissions? Are you certain? Absolutely. The same signature we've been detecting from the galactic core, just at a much lower intensity. Another pause, longer this time. Captain, I'm upgrading this mission to Priority Alpha, Alexander finally said, his voice tight with controlled tension. Do not, under any circumstances, attempt to make contact with the object. Maintain observation distance and continue passive scans only. Reed frowned. Understood, Commander, but if I may ask, what exactly are we dealing with here? We don't know, came the honest reply. But Dr. Wright has a theory, the signal we've been tracking, the one counting down. It may not be communication at all. It might be... activation. Activation? Of what? Of whatever you're looking at right now, Captain. And possibly others like it scattered throughout the galaxy. Reed felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's carefully regulated temperature. He glanced at the scan results again, seeing them in a new and more ominous light. How long has it been there, do you think? He asked quietly. Impossible to say for certain, but given its location and the fact that we've never detected it before despite numerous surveys of the outer system. Alexander's voice grew grim. It could have been there for millions of years, dormant, waiting. For what? That's what we need to find out. Continue your observations, Captain, and be prepared to withdraw immediately if the object shows any signs of activity. As the communication ended, Reed turned to his science officer. a brilliant xenophysicist named Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura. Thoughts, Doctor? Nakamura had been studying the scan results with intense concentration. The structure. It reminds me of something, Captain. The way it's configured, with these concentric rings in the central sphere. It's almost like... Like what? Like a mechanical iris, or a gateway. Nakamura looked up, his expression troubled. If we assume the tachyon emissions are some form of communication, and this structure is responding to signals from the galactic core, then we could be looking at one end of a very long tunnel. Reed finished, the implications settling in his stomach like lead. Precisely, and if Dr. Wright is correct about an activation sequence, Reed didn't need the scientist to complete the thought. If the mysterious object at the edge of their solar system was indeed some kind of gateway, and if it was counting down to activation, then the question wasn't just what might come through, but what might have placed it there in the first place. Continue scans, he ordered. I want to know the moment anything changes about that object, and prepare the temporal displacement field, just in case. As his crew hurried to comply, Reed found himself staring at the visual representation of the scans, a ghostly outline of concentric rings surrounding a perfect sphere, hovering at the edge of human territory like a silent sentinel, or a ticking bomb. In the observation bubble of the Pathfinder, Captain Reed watched the strange artifact with growing unease. For 3 days, it had remained dormant, emitting only the faint tachyon signature that had led to its discovery. But in the past hour, something had changed. Energy output has increased by 27%, Dr. Nakamura reported, eyes fixed on his instruments. The concentric rings are beginning to rotate, though at different velocities. Any response to our passive scans? Negative, Captain. It still doesn't seem aware of our presence. Reed wasn't entirely convinced. Something that had remained hidden at the edge of humanity's home system for potentially millions of years was unlikely to be oblivious to a ship observing it from relatively close range. Maintain distance, he ordered, and be ready to activate the temporal field at the first sign of... Captain! The sensor officer interrupted. New contacts! Multiple signatures appearing around the artifact. The holographic display showed a dozen small objects materializing from what appeared to be miniature rifts in space-time. Tears in the fabric of reality that sealed themselves as soon as the objects emerged. Analysis? Dr. Nakamura's hands flew over his console. They appear to be probes of some kind, approximately 2 meters in length, composed of materials similar to the main artifact. Direction? They're dispersing, moving outward in all directions. The scientist looked up, expression grim. Including toward us. Reed made an instant decision. Tactical alert, shields up, prepare to activate the temporal displacement field. As the crew rushed to battle stations, Reed opened a direct quantum link to Earth Defense Command. Commander Winters, we have a situation. The artifact has deployed multiple probes. At least one is on an intercept course with Pathfinder. Alexander's response was immediate. Can you evade without using main engines? Negative. These probes are fast, moving at approximately 0.3 C and accelerating. They'll intercept us within 17 minutes. There was a brief pause. Understood, Captain. You are authorized to use the temporal field if the probe approaches within defensive perimeter. But do not, repeat, do not engage with conventional weapons unless directly attacked. Copy that. Reed turned to his tactical officer. Temporal field at standby. Target the approaching probe, but do not activate until my command. The minutes ticked by in tense silence as the probe rapidly closed the distance. Unlike the main artifact, it was fully visible, a sleek metallic object with no obvious propulsion system, yet moving at speeds that should have been impossible in normal space. 2 minutes to intercept, the tactical officer announced. Temporal field charged and ready. The probe is scanning us, Dr. Nakamura reported. Extremely advanced sensor suite. It's penetrating our stealth systems like they aren't even there. Reed watched the approaching object on the main view screen, fighting the instinct to order evasive maneuvers. Earth Defense Command wanted to avoid showing the full extent of their technological capabilities unless absolutely necessary. 1 minute to intercept. Any hostile actions? Reed demanded. Negative, sir. Just scanning. 30 seconds. Reed made his decision. Hold temporal field. Let's see what it does. Sir? The tactical officer looked alarmed. The orders were clear. The orders were to use the field if it approached within defensive perimeter. I'm redefining the perimeter. Reed kept his eyes fixed on the screen. Sometimes the best way to learn about an enemy is to let them make the first move. The probe slowed as it approached the Pathfinder, coming to a relative stop approximately 100 meters from the ship's bow. It hovered there, still scanning, its metallic surface rippling slightly as if it were composed of some kind of intelligent liquid. Fascinating, Dr. Nakamura murmured. It's adapting its sensor frequencies to penetrate different sections of our hull, almost like it's curious. Or gathering intelligence for an attack, the tactical officer muttered. For 5 tense minutes the probe maintained its position, scanning the Pathfinder from bow to stern. Then, without warning, it accelerated away, rejoining the other probes that had deployed from the artifact.
Track it, Reed ordered.
Where are they going? The sensor officer expanded the tactical display, showing the movements of all 12 probes. They appear to be forming a pattern around the artifact, equidistant positions in a spherical arrangement. Like satellites, Dr. Nakamura suggested. Or a defense grid, Reed finished grimly. Keep monitoring, and send all scan data back to Earth immediately. As the Pathfinder's crew observed, the probes took up their positions around the ancient artifact. Then, as one, they began to emit focused tachyon beams toward the central structure. The concentric rings accelerated their rotation, and the sphere at the center began to glow with an eerie blue-green light. Energy levels rising exponentially, Dr. Nakamura reported, his voice tight with tension. Whatever that thing is, it's powering up. Reed opened the quantum link again. Commander Winters, the artifact is activating. Repeat, the artifact is activating. Awaiting instructions. The response came not from Alexander, but from Admiral Zhao.
Captain Reed, you are ordered to withdraw immediately to a minimum safe distance of 1 astronomical unit. Do not, under any circumstances, attempt to interfere with the artifact's activation. Reed frowned.
Admiral, if this thing is some kind of weapon, we have other assets in position, Captain. Zhao cut him off. Your ship is too valuable to risk. Withdraw now. Understood, Admiral. Reed closed the link, then turned to his navigation officer.
Set course to maintain observation from 1 AU distance. Maximum stealth protocols. As the Pathfinder began its careful withdrawal, Reed couldn't shake the feeling that they were witnessing the beginning of something monumental and potentially catastrophic.
The artifact, dormant for millions of years, was awakening, and humanity, for all its advanced technology and careful preparations, had no idea what would emerge when its ancient eye finally opened. The emergency session of Earth's Unified Defense Council convened virtually, with representatives from every major power joining via quantum-entangled communication. Alexander had presented the information from both Skitter's and the Pathfinder's discovery, along with Dr. Wright's latest analysis of the signal. So we're supposed to believe that the Hegemony just happened to discover these ancient artifacts at the same time we did? General Okonkwo of the African Union Forces said skeptically. After they tried to conquer us? The timing is suspicious, Admiral Zhao acknowledged, but the correlation with Dr. Wright's findings is too precise to be coincidental. Unless they've intercepted our research, suggested Director Lee of the Pan-Asian Coalition. Our quantum communications should be secure, but we can't rule out the possibility of a breach. Alexander shook his head. If they had access to our research, they wouldn't need to ask what we know. And they certainly wouldn't have revealed their own discoveries. Unless it's an elaborate deception, General Okonkwo insisted. To what end? President Rivera of the American States countered. If this is some kind of trap, I don't see the strategy behind it. Dr. Wright, who had been silent until now, cleared her throat. The science supports the ambassador's claims. The signal is real. Its connection to cosmic expansion events is mathematically demonstrable, and the object at the edge of our solar system corresponds to the patterns we're detecting. So what are we dealing with? Director Lee asked bluntly. Ancient alien technology? Some kind of doomsday device? We don't know, Alexander admitted. But if the Hegemony has detected similar artifacts in their territory, and if those artifacts are also responding to the signal, then whatever's coming affects the entire galaxy. Admiral Zhao finished grimly. The question, President Rivera said, is whether we share what we know with the Hegemony, whether we trust them enough to cooperate against this, whatever it is. The council chamber fell silent as each representative considered the implications. Humanity had spent decades preparing for conflict with alien civilizations, developing technologies and strategies specifically designed to protect Earth from external threats. The Hegemony had proven those preparations necessary with their attempted invasion. But now they faced something potentially far more dangerous. A threat so ancient and powerful that it had left artifacts scattered across the galaxy. Artifacts now awakening after millions of years of dormancy. I propose a limited exchange of information,
Alexander said finally. We confirm that we've detected the signal and share our analysis of its pattern. We acknowledge the discovery of an artifact in our system, but withhold specific details about its location and our capabilities to monitor it.
And what do we ask for in return?
General Okonkwo demanded. Everything they know about the artifacts they've discovered. The locations, the behaviors, the historical references, and… Alexander hesitated. Access to the prophecies they mentioned, the complete text, not just the fragments they've chosen to share. President Rivera nodded slowly. A reasonable approach. We maintain our strategic advantage while establishing a framework for cooperation against a common threat. Assuming it is a common threat, Director Lee cautioned, and not something the hegemony themselves set in motion. If they had that level of technology, they wouldn't have lost their fleet to our defenses, Admiral Zhao pointed out. The debate continued for another hour, but eventually the Council reached consensus. Earth would pursue cautious cooperation with the hegemony regarding the signal and the artifacts, while maintaining full military readiness in case the diplomatic approach proved misguided. As the session concluded, Dr. Wright remained connected to Alexander's private channel. Commander, she said once the others had signed off, there's something I didn't want to mention in the full council meeting. Something concerning. Go on. The object the Pathfinder discovered. We've been analyzing its tachyon emissions more closely. They're not just responding to the signal from the galactic core. They're modifying it, amplifying certain frequencies, dampening others. What does that mean? I don't know for certain, Eleanor admitted. But one possibility is that these artifacts aren't just passively receiving instructions. They're participating in some kind of negotiation. Alexander frowned. Negotiation with what? That's the question, isn't it? Eleanor's expression was troubled. Whatever exists at the galactic core, whatever is sending the signal, it's communicating with these artifacts, and they're communicating back. Could it be some kind of distributed intelligence? A network spanning the galaxy? Possibly, or separate entities with aligned interests. Eleanor hesitated. There's something else. The temporal displacement technology we developed. The one Captain Reed's ships used against the Hegemony fleet's planet crackers. What about it? The theoretical basis for that technology came from the first crashed alien ship we recovered. The one discovered in New Mexico in 1947. We assumed it was Hegemony technology, more advanced than what they currently employ. But now you think differently, Alexander guessed. Eleanor nodded grimly. The energy signature of that ship matches what we're detecting from the artifact at the edge of our solar system. I don't think it was Hegemony technology at all. I think it might have been one of these artifacts, or something created by whoever built them. The implications were staggering. If humanity's most advanced defensive technology had been reverse-engineered from the same civilization that had created the artifacts now responding to the signal. Could the crashed ship have been sabotaged as well? Alexander asked, remembering Skitter's final comment about damaged artifacts. Like the ones the ambassador mentioned? It's possible. The damage was extensive, but we always assumed it was from the crash itself. Eleanor's expression grew distant, thoughtful. What if someone has been trying to prevent these artifacts from activating, for millions of years? But who, and why? I don't know. But whoever they are, they might be the allies we need right now. Over the next hour, information flowed freely between Earth and the Hegemony's capital. The ancient texts Skitters had mentioned painted a disturbing picture. A cycle of expansion and contraction that had repeated every 7 to 10 million years throughout the galaxy's history. Each cycle ended with what the texts called the severance, when large portions of the galaxy were seemingly cut off from the rest, isolated in bubbles of accelerated space-time where time itself flowed differently. According to these records, Eleanor said as she analyzed the data, previous civilizations attempted to prevent the cycle by sabotaging the gateway artifacts. Some apparently succeeded in delaying the process, but never in stopping it entirely. And these architects who sleep beyond time? Alexander asked. The texts are frustratingly vague, Skitters replied via the communication link. They're described variously as shapers of reality, dividers of existence, and curators of life. Whether these are literal beings or metaphorical descriptions of natural cosmic forces is unclear. What is clear, Eleanor interjected, is that we're facing the same phenomenon that has reshaped the galaxy multiple times in the past, and we have less than 3 days before it happens again.
Alexander stared at the holographic representation of the galaxy, now dotted with the locations of known artifacts, 30 in total, including Earth's. They formed a pattern that was difficult to discern at first glance, but became clearer when viewed from certain angles. A vast, three-dimensional web with the galactic core at its center. "Ambassador," he said finally, "what do your scientists believe will happen when these gateways fully activate?" Skitter's compound eyes reflected the holographic light.
The prevailing theory is that they will create a network of traversable wormholes, connecting distant regions of the galaxy instantly. Some believe this network will then be used to evaluate civilizations. Evaluate how? Unknown. But the texts suggest that some species are preserved within the network, while others are left in the severed regions of space, effectively isolated from the rest of the galaxy forever. A quarantine, Alexander murmured.
Or exile.
Precisely. Eleanor had been studying the pattern of artifacts with growing intensity.
"Commander Ambassador, look at this distribution. If we map the known artifacts against stellar density and species development..." She manipulated the display, highlighting civilized regions of the galaxy. The pattern suddenly became clear. The artifacts formed a boundary around the most developed regions, encompassing perhaps 40% of the galaxy's total volume, but nearly 80% of its known intelligent species.
"It's a selection process," she said quietly.
"These gateways define the boundary of whatever region will be preserved when the severance occurs." "And Earth?" Alexander asked.
"Are we inside or outside the boundary?"
Eleanor zoomed in on the local sector. "We're exactly on the boundary. The artifact in our system appears to be one of the demarcation points. As are several in hegemony space," Skitters noted. "It seems our civilizations straddle the division line." The implications were profound. When the severance occurred, humanity and the hegemony might find themselves partially preserved and partially exiled, literally divided by cosmic forces beyond their comprehension. "We need to find a way to prevent this," Alexander said firmly. "Or at least delay it until we better understand what we're facing." "Previous civilizations tried and failed," Skitters reminded him. "What could we possibly do that they could not?" Alexander's expression hardened with determination. "They didn't have what we have." "And what is that, Commander?" "Desperation, Ambassador, and a profound unwillingness to accept fate." Alexander turned to Eleanor. "The crashed ship in New Mexico, the one that matched the artifact's energy signature, was it attempting to destroy the gateway?" Eleanor considered this. The damage patterns were always puzzling. It didn't look like a standard crash, more like the ship had been caught in some kind of energy discharge. Her eyes widened with sudden understanding. It was trying to sabotage the artifact, and the artifact defended itself. "But it had capabilities we've since reverse-engineered," Alexander pressed.
"Temporal manipulation, quantum entanglement weapons. Technologies that might be effective against the artifacts," Eleanor agreed, excitement building in her voice.
"Especially if they were derived from the same civilization that created them." "You're suggesting we use the ancient weapons against their creators?" Skitters asked, mandibles clicking in what might have been disbelief. "I'm suggesting we use every tool at our disposal to protect our civilizations," Alexander corrected. "Both human and hegemony." The insectoid ambassador was silent for a long moment. "The Council will be hesitant. These artifacts are of immense power and unknown purpose. Interfering might trigger worse consequences than the severance itself. And doing nothing guarantees that our civilizations will be divided, potentially forever," Alexander countered. "Ambassador, I understand the risk. But if there's even a chance we can prevent this cycle from completing, don't we have an obligation to try?" Skitter's antennae twitched in what Alexander had come to recognize as deep thought. "I will convey your proposal to the Council, but I must warn you, they are divided and fearful. Some may prefer to accept the severance rather than risk antagonizing whatever intelligence controls these artifacts." "Then remind them of the prophecy," Alexander said intently. "The one about humans either saving the galaxy or burning it to ash. Maybe this is the moment that prophecy was referring to all along." As the ambassador's image faded from the screen, Eleanor turned to Alexander with a troubled expression. "Commander, there's something I've been considering. Something disturbing." "Go on." "These artifacts, the signal, the cyclic nature of the severance. What if it's not malevolent at all? What if it's protective?" Alexander frowned. "Protective how?" "Consider the pattern of boundaries. The artifacts encompass the most developed regions of the galaxy. What if the severance isn't about exile, but preservation?" What if something out there, something beyond our galaxy, is so dangerous that isolating advanced civilizations is the only way to protect them? It was a perspective Alexander hadn't considered, and it sent a chill down his spine. You're suggesting that whatever created these artifacts is trying to help us? Or at least preserve us, like a cosmic wildlife refuge? Eleanor's expression was somber. In which case, interfering with the process could expose us to whatever threat the Severance is designed to protect against. Alexander stared at the galactic map, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Humanity had fought for its independence, had revealed its teeth to the galaxy when threatened. But now they faced a force so vast and ancient that even the concept of resistance might be meaningless. Yet the alternative, passively accepting division and isolation, went against everything humans stood for. We need more information, he decided finally. Direct observation of what happens when one of these gateways fully activates. Without that, we're just guessing at motives and consequences. The Pathfinder is maintaining observation of our local artifact, Eleanor reminded him. But at 1 AU distance, their data will be limited. Then we'll need to get closer. Alexander opened a communication channel to Admiral Zhao. Admiral, I need a stealth drone deployed to the artifact's immediate vicinity. Something small enough to avoid detection, but sophisticated enough to transmit quantum-entangled data. That's a significant risk, Commander, Zhao cautioned. If the artifact perceives the drone as a threat, it's a risk we need to take. We're working with the Hegemony to develop countermeasures, but we need better intelligence on exactly what we're facing. After a moment's hesitation, Zhao nodded. I'll have the drone deployed within the hour, but Commander, if this goes wrong, I know, Admiral, the responsibility is mine. The stealth drone designated Shadow Eye approached the ancient artifact with infinitesimal caution, its advanced propulsion system allowing it to maneuver without detectable emissions. At barely 20 centimeters in diameter, it was the smallest vessel capable of housing a quantum entanglement communication module, a technological marvel that represented the pinnacle of human engineering. In the Antarctic monitoring station, Alexander and Eleanor watched through the drone's sensors as it closed to within 1 kilometer of the massive gateway. Energy output continuing to rise, Eleanor reported, studying the incoming data. The rotation of the concentric rings has synchronized. They're all moving at precisely the same angular velocity now. And the probes? Maintaining their positions, they appear to be channeling energy directly to the central sphere. The artifact had transformed over the past 12 hours. What had once been a dark, barely detectable object now pulsed with blue-green light, its perfect geometries eerily beautiful against the void of space. The sphere at its center had begun to shimmer, as if the boundary between it and normal space was becoming permeable. I've never seen readings like these, Eleanor murmured, her scientific curiosity momentarily overriding her concern. It's creating a stable Einstein-Rosen bridge without any apparent negative mass. That should be impossible. Clearly someone forgot to tell them that, Alexander said dryly. The drone continued its approach, now just 500 meters from the outer ring of the artifact. So far, it had avoided detection by the Sentinel probes, its stealth systems apparently more effective against them than the Pathfinders had been. Wait, Eleanor said suddenly, leaning forward. Something's changing. The central sphere, it's expanding. On the holographic display, they watched as the perfect sphere at the artifact's center began to grow, its surface rippling like liquid mercury. The surrounding rings adjusted their positions automatically, maintaining their concentric arrangement around the expanding core. Energy levels spiking, Eleanor reported, her voice tight. Tachyon emissions increasing exponentially, I think. She never finished her sentence. Without warning, the central sphere flashed with brilliant light, momentarily overloading the drone's visual sensors. When the image cleared, the sphere had transformed into what could only be described as a window, a perfectly circular opening that seemed to look into somewhere else. My God, Eleanor whispered. It's open. Through the gateway they could see stars, but not the familiar constellations of Earth's sky. These were densely packed, swirling in patterns that suggested proximity to the galactic core. The view shifted slightly, as if the window were adjusting its focus, zooming in on a specific region of that distant space. And then they saw it. A structure, massive beyond comprehension, its dimensions difficult for the human mind to fully grasp. It appeared to be a lattice of interconnected spheres, each one the size of a small moon, arranged in geometric patterns that hurt the eyes to follow. What is that? Alexander breathed. I think... Eleanor's voice faltered. I think we're looking at the source of the signal, the control center for all the gateways. Before either of them could say more,
Something emerged from the structure, a stream of objects moving with purpose toward the gateway. As they approached, their forms became clearer. Ships, or at least vessels of some kind. Their design was utterly alien, flowing, organic shapes that seemed to bend and flex as they moved, as if they weren't fully committed to existing in three-dimensional space.
They're coming through, Alexander realized with mounting alarm.
Eleanor, how many of these gateways are activating simultaneously? All 30 that we know of, she replied, her voice hollow with implication.
30 gateways. 30 potential invasion points scattered across the galaxy. Alexander opened an emergency channel to Earth Defense Command. This is Winters. The artifact has activated and is serving as a gateway. Unknown vessels approaching from what appears to be the galactic core. Numbers unclear but potentially significant. Recommend immediate defensive posture. Even as he spoke, the first of the alien vessels reached the gateway. It paused momentarily at the threshold, its form rippling and shifting as if adjusting to the transition between spaces. Then, with a fluid motion that defied conventional physics, it passed through and emerged in the solar system. Up close, through the drone's sensors, the vessel was even more alien than it had appeared at a distance. It had no visible propulsion system, no weapons arrays, no external features that might indicate its function. It was simply a flowing, shifting shape of iridescent material that seemed to absorb and reflect light in impossible ways. More vessels followed, streaming through the gateway in a continuous flow. 5, then 10, then dozens. They're dispersing, Eleanor noted, watching the tactical display as the alien ships spread out from the gateway. Moving in all directions, including toward the inner solar system. Toward Earth, Alexander said grimly. As if in response to his words, one of the vessels altered course, moving directly toward the stealth drone. Despite its supposedly undetectable nature, the drone had apparently been noticed. Evasive maneuvers, Alexander ordered the drone's AI. The tiny vessel attempted to retreat, but the alien ship moved with impossible speed, enveloping the drone in a field of shifting energy before it could escape. For a moment, the transmission continued, showing the interior of the energy field, a swirling vortex of patterns that seemed to be analyzing the drone, taking it apart at the molecular level. Then the transmission abruptly ended. Connection lost, Eleanor reported unnecessarily. They detected and neutralized our drone in seconds. Alexander was already opening multiple communication channels. Admiral Zhao, unknown vessels have emerged from the gateway. Numbers in the dozens and increasing. Request immediate deployment of the defense fleet. Understood, Commander. Fleet is mobilizing. Zhao's voice was calm but tense. What are we dealing with? Unknown capabilities, but advanced beyond anything we've encountered. They neutralized our stealth drone effortlessly. Acknowledged. The remaining lunar defense systems are being brought to full readiness. Alexander opened another channel. Ambassador Skitters, the gateway in our system has activated. Unknown vessels are emerging. Is the hegemony experiencing the same? The insectoid's image appeared, mandibles clicking rapidly in agitation. Yes, Commander. All 29 artifacts in hegemony space have activated simultaneously. Vessels of unknown design are emerging from each gateway. Has there been any attempt at communication? Any hostile actions? None yet. The vessels are dispersing throughout our systems. Some appear to be scanning our planets and installations, but they have not responded to communication attempts or shown overtly aggressive behavior. That at least was something. If the vessels were an invasion force, they were taking a curiously passive approach. The Council is divided on how to respond, Skitters continued. Some advocate immediate military action. Others caution restraint until we understand their intentions. What's your assessment, Ambassador? Skitter's antennae drooped slightly. I believe these beings, whoever or whatever they are, possess technology so far beyond our own that military action would be futile. Our best hope lies in establishing communication and understanding their purpose. It was a reasonable position, but Alexander wasn't ready to stake Earth's safety on the benevolence of unknown entities who had just bypassed all of humanity's outer system defenses. We'll attempt communication, he agreed, but we're also moving our defense forces into position. If these vessels approach Earth, we need to be prepared. Of course. Skitters hesitated. Commander, there is one more thing. The ancient texts. They mention a final assessment before the severance. A test of sorts. What kind of test? The translations are imprecise, but they suggest that the architects evaluate each civilization's response to their arrival, how they react to the unknown. Alexander felt a chill run down his spine. You're saying our response right now might determine whether we're preserved or exiled when the severance occurs? It's a theory some of our scholars have proposed, Skitters acknowledged, though others believe the decision was made long ago, and what we're witnessing is simply the implementation. Either way, the stakes had just gotten considerably higher. Humanity's instinctive response to potential threats had always been to prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. But if that very preparation might be seen as aggression by beings with the power to exile Earth from the galactic community. I need to consult with Earth's leadership, Alexander said finally. We'll maintain open communication channels with the hegemony. If you learn anything new about these vessels or their intentions, contact me immediately. As Skitter's image faded, Alexander turned to Eleanor, his expression grim. How long until these vessels could reach Earth at their current velocity? At the speeds we've observed, less than 6 hours. 6 hours to prepare for contact with a civilization potentially millions of years more advanced than humanity. 6 hours to decide whether to extend a hand in greeting or raise shields in defense. Alert all astronomical facilities to track these vessels, Alexander ordered, and get me a direct link to the Unified Defense Council. This situation just escalated beyond our worst-case scenarios. The council convened within the hour, faces grim as they reviewed the footage from the drone. President Rivera spoke first, her normally composed demeanor showing signs of strain. So we have unknown vessels of clearly superior technology bypassing all our outer system defenses and potentially heading toward Earth, she summarized. And our options are what exactly? We have 3 basic choices, Admiral Zhao replied. Full military response, partial defensive posture with attempt at communication, or complete stand-down to demonstrate peaceful intentions. Our remaining defensive assets are limited, General Okonkwo pointed out. If these vessels are hostile, we may have few effective countermeasures. Or deploying what we have might provoke them unnecessarily, Director Lee countered. If Ambassador Skitters is correct about this being some kind of test, we can't base our entire defense strategy on an alien prophecy, Okonkwo scoffed. No, Alexander agreed. But we can't ignore the pattern either. These vessels emerged simultaneously from 30 gateways across the galaxy. They're clearly coordinated, and so far they've taken no overtly hostile action despite clearly having the capability to do so. What do you recommend, Commander? President Rivera asked directly. Alexander considered carefully before answering. A balanced approach. We position our fleet defensively, but at a respectful distance. We activate our planetary shield, but keep our remaining weapons systems powered down unless directly threatened. And we attempt communication on all frequencies, including the tachyon bands that match the signal. And if they ignore our attempts at communication? General Okonkwo pressed. If they continue toward Earth? Then we escalate our response proportionally, Alexander said firmly. But we don't fire the first shot, not against a civilization with this level of technology. The Council debated further, but ultimately approved Alexander's recommended approach. Earth's defensive fleet, the fewer remaining vessels that had survived the hegemony conflict and subsequent preparations, moved into position in high Earth orbit, forming a protective screen around the planet. The planetary shield generators, now fully calibrated across both hemispheres, were brought to maximum sustainable output. And on every conceivable frequency, humanity broadcast a simple message of greeting and peaceful intent. 5 hours later, with the alien vessels now crossing the orbit of Mars and still showing no response to communication attempts, Alexander stood in the Geneva Command Center alongside Ambassador Skitters, watching the approaching fleet on the massive tactical display. Still no word from your council? Alexander asked the insectoid. They continue to debate, Skitters replied, his tone suggesting what he thought of such delays. Some factions are pushing for immediate military action. Others favor complete submission. And neither approach seems right, Alexander noted. Indeed. Skitter's compound eyes reflected the moving lights of the display. The ancient texts described the architects as neither benevolent nor malevolent, but rather utilitarian. They preserve what they deem worthy and exile what they do not. Based on what criteria? That's the question, isn't it? The ambassador's antennae twitched thoughtfully. My personal theory, and I stress this is not the official hegemony position, is that they evaluate adaptability, the capacity to respond appropriately to unprecedented situations. It made a certain kind of sense. A civilization that could neither defend itself nor communicate effectively would struggle in a galaxy full of diverse intelligences. Perhaps the architects, whoever they were,
simply ensured that the species allowed to interact freely were those capable of doing so constructively.
"Commander," the communications officer called out. "We're detecting a new signal from the lead vessel. It's responding to our broadcasts." Alexander moved quickly to the communications station.
On speakers. The signal that emerged was unlike anything he had ever heard. A series of modulating tones that seemed to shift in patterns too complex for the human ear to follow. Yet somehow, as it continued, the patterns began to resolve into something almost comprehensible, as if the signal were evolving in real time to match human linguistic structures.
"They're learning our language," Skitters observed, mandibles clicking in excitement. "Adapting their communication to our cognitive framework."
After several minutes, the tones gave way to words, stilted and oddly emphasized, but recognizable English.
"Attention Earth species. We are the Conservators. Your system has been identified as a boundary node in the coming severance. Prepare for assessment." The message repeated 3 times, then fell silent.
"Conservators," Alexander repeated.
"Not architects. A functional title rather than a descriptive one," Skitters noted.
"Suggesting their primary purpose is preservation." But preservation of what? Alexander wondered.
"And what exactly does this assessment entail?" As if in answer to his question, the tactical display suddenly lit up with new alerts.
The alien vessels, the Conservators, had accelerated, now moving toward Earth at velocities that should have been impossible to achieve so quickly.
"Time to intercept?" Alexander demanded.
17 minutes, the tactical officer reported tensely.
"Fleet status?" "In defensive formation, sir. Shields at maximum. Weapon systems armed but not targeted." Alexander turned to Skitters. "Any insight on what we should expect from this assessment?" The insectoid's antennae drooped slightly. "The texts are frustratingly vague. They speak of trials of comprehension and demonstrations of worthiness, but the specific nature of these tests varies with each cycle." "Helpful," Alexander muttered. Then, more loudly, "Open a channel to the approaching vessels." When the communication officer signaled readiness, Alexander spoke clearly and with deliberate calm. "Attention Conservator vessels. This is Commander Alexander Winters of Earth Defense Command. We acknowledge your message and are prepared for assessment. We request clarification on what this process entails and how we may participate constructively." There was no immediate response. The Conservator ships continued their approach, now passing the orbit of Luna. Earth's defensive fleet held position, a thin line of protection between the advancing aliens and the homeworld. 15 minutes to intercept, the tactical officer updated. "The Conservator vessels have altered formation. They're surrounding us." The tactical display confirmed it. The alien ships had spread out, forming a spherical arrangement around Earth and its defensive fleet, not attacking, but effectively cutting off any potential escape routes. "Admiral Zhao is requesting permission to power up our remaining defense systems," the communications officer reported. Alexander hesitated. The few quantum weapons and defensive installations that remained after the lunar platform's destruction were humanity's last resort, weapons that could potentially damage the Conservator vessels. But using them, or even preparing to use them, might be perceived as aggression. "Negative," he decided. "Maintain current posture, shields only." Skitter's mandibles clicked in what might have been approval. "A wise choice, Commander." "I hope so," Alexander replied grimly. 10 tense minutes passed. The Conservator vessels maintained their spherical formation, neither advancing further nor initiating communication. Earth's defensive fleet held position, weapons ready but untargeted. Then, without warning, a brilliant beam of energy lanced from the lead Conservator ship. Not toward Earth or the defense fleet, but toward several key defensive installations around the solar system. "They're targeting our remaining weapons!" someone shouted. "No," Alexander realized, watching the beam's precise targeting. "They're neutralizing them. They know exactly where everything is." Before anyone could respond, the beams intensified, systematically disabling Earth's remaining defensive capabilities. Space-based weapons platforms, hidden missile installations, even the few ships that had been held in reserve, all were rendered inert in a matter of minutes. Not destroyed, not damaged, simply deactivated, leaving their crews unharmed but their weapons useless. "Assessment in progress," came the Conservator voice over the communication channel. "Capability evaluation, significant. Restraint evaluation, pending." Alexander exchanged a glance with Skitters. "They're testing our restraint," he murmured. "Seeing if we'll attack even after they neutralized our weapons." The insectoid's antennae twitched in agreement. The hegemony would have launched an all-out assault by now. Perhaps that is why so many of our worlds lie on the boundary. All fleet vessels maintain position, Alexander ordered firmly. Do not, repeat, do not target the conservator ships. This is a test, not an attack. Even as he spoke, more energy beams lanced out from the alien vessels. Dozens of them, each targeting different Earth installations. In less than 5 minutes, Earth had been effectively disarmed. Assessment continues, the conservator voice announced. Military capability neutralized. Evaluating cultural and cognitive parameters. Without warning, every communication device on Earth, from military channels to civilian networks, began receiving the same signal. A complex mathematical equation that seemed to shift and evolve as one attempted to solve it. It's some kind of intelligence test. Dr. Wright's voice came through on a priority channel. But it's not just testing mathematical ability. The equation has multiple valid solutions depending on which axioms you prioritize. They're testing our value systems, Alexander realized. Seeing which solutions we gravitate toward. The most efficient, the most elegant, the most adaptable. Commander, the tactical officer interrupted. The conservator vessels are deploying something. Smaller objects descending toward major population centers. The display showed hundreds of small, spherical devices separating from the alien ships and descending through Earth's atmosphere. Similar devices were being deployed to the lunar colonies and the Mars settlements. Are they weapons? Someone demanded. Negative, the sensor officer reported after a moment. They appear to be observation platforms? They're taking up positions in public spaces, interfaces activating. Reports began flooding in from around the world. The spherical devices were indeed observation platforms, each one projecting a holographic interface that allowed humans to interact with it. The interfaces displayed questions, puzzles, ethical dilemmas, all apparently designed to evaluate human cognitive patterns and decision-making processes. It's a comprehensive assessment, Skitters observed, studying the incoming data. They're evaluating your species at every level. Technological, military, cultural, ethical, cognitive. And what happens when the assessment is complete? Alexander asked quietly. The ambassador's compound eyes fixed on him solemnly. According to the texts, the severance follows immediately. Those deemed worthy remain connected through the gateway network. Those deemed unworthy are exiled to the severed regions of space-time. And there's nothing we can do to prevent it? Previous civilizations tried and failed, Skitters reminded him. The conservators operate on a scale beyond our comprehension. Their technology appears to manipulate the fundamental forces of the universe itself. Alexander stared at the tactical display, watching as the assessment unfolded across Earth and its colonies. Humanity was being tested, its worthiness to remain connected to the galactic community evaluated by criteria they barely understood. It went against everything he believed in, the idea that some external force could judge his species and pronounce sentence without appeal. That Earth's fate could be decided not by human actions or choices, but by the inscrutable standards of ancient entities who had appointed themselves the galaxy's conservators. No, he said suddenly, straightening. I don't accept this. Skitter's antennae twitched in surprise. Commander? I don't accept that we have no choice but to submit to this assessment. Alexander's voice grew stronger, more determined. That we have to sit back and let these conservators decide our fate based on criteria we don't even understand. What alternative do you propose? The ambassador asked. They've neutralized your weapons. They've surrounded your planet. Their technology is millions of years beyond yours. Maybe so, Alexander acknowledged. But there's one thing they haven't accounted for. One thing that's always made humans different. And what is that? Alexander's eyes gleamed with determination. We don't play by the rules when the game is rigged. Before Skitters could respond, Alexander opened a communication channel to the conservator vessels. Attention conservators. This is Commander Alexander Winters of Earth. We recognize your assessment process, but we reject its premise and legitimacy. There was a moment of silence, then the now familiar voice responded. Rejection noted. Assessment continues. Compliance is not required for evaluation. You misunderstand, Alexander continued, undeterred. We're not simply refusing to participate. We are actively challenging your authority to judge us at all. This time, the silence lasted longer. When the response came, there was a subtle change in the artificial voice's cadence. Clarify challenge basis. Alexander smiled grimly. He'd gotten their attention. Your entire system, this cycle of severance and selection, operates on the assumption that you have the right to determine which civilizations are worthy of preservation and which should be exiled. We reject that assumption.
No species, no matter how technologically advanced, has the inherent right to judge another. Commander, Skitters whispered urgently. What are you doing? This approach has never been documented in any of the texts. Maybe that's exactly the problem, Alexander replied quietly. Maybe every other species simply accepted the assessment as inevitable. The conservator voice spoke again. Authority derives from capability. Conservator function is preservation of optimal galactic development patterns. Severance protocol prevents contamination by unsuitable species. Contamination! Alexander seized on the word. So this isn't about preservation at all. It's about control, about ensuring that only species that meet your specific criteria are allowed to interact freely within the galaxy. Correct. Unregulated interaction leads to chaos. Severance maintains order. And who decided what order should look like? Alexander challenged. Who determined that your values, your definition of optimal development, should be imposed on every intelligent species? There was another pause, longer than before. Around the command center, staff exchanged nervous glances. Skitter's mandibles clicked anxiously. Conservator directive established by progenitor civilization. Implementation continuous for 250 million years. Effectiveness demonstrated by galactic stability. 250 million years, Alexander repeated, looking around at the gathered staff and the ambassador.
That's how long this cycle has been repeating. How many civilizations have you judged in that time? How many have you exiled? Statistical data irrelevant to current assessment. I disagree, Alexander pressed.
It's entirely relevant, because it demonstrates a pattern of behavior spanning hundreds of millions of years without apparent evolution or adaptation. You claim to assess species based on their adaptability, their capacity to respond appropriately to new situations. Yet your own process has remained static for 250 million years. This time, the silence stretched so long that Alexander wondered if the conservators had simply decided to ignore him. But eventually the response came. Assessment protocol modifications, 847 over operational timeline, criteria adaptations, 4203, assessment parameters not static. But the fundamental premise hasn't changed, Alexander pointed out. You still believe you have the right to judge and potentially exile entire species based on criteria they don't fully understand and had no part in establishing. Understanding not required for valid assessment. From your perspective, perhaps. But consider this. A truly advanced civilization would recognize the limitations of its own judgment. It would understand that diversity of thought, of values, of approaches, even those it might consider suboptimal, contributes to the richness and resilience of galactic life. Alexander paused, gathering his thoughts. This was perhaps the most important argument he would ever make, not just for humanity, but for every species facing the conservator's judgment. What if your optimal development pattern is actually limiting the galaxy's potential? What if by exiling species that don't fit your criteria, you're creating an artificial evolutionary bottleneck that prevents truly novel approaches from emerging? The tactical display suddenly showed new activity. The conservator vessels were changing position, clustering closer together as if engaged in some form of communication or consultation. You've got them thinking, Skitters murmured, antennae twitching rapidly. In all the recorded cycles, I've never read of any species challenging the assessment process itself. Alternative proposal requested, the conservator voice finally responded. If severance protocol suspended, what mechanism would maintain galactic order? It was a question Alexander hadn't expected, an opening perhaps to negotiate rather than simply accept judgment. He considered carefully before responding. Cooperative self-regulation, he suggested. A galactic community where diverse species establish shared principles while respecting cultural and developmental differences, where technological and ethical advancement is encouraged but not forced, where conflicts are resolved through communication and compromise rather than exile. Theoretical model lacks empirical validation. Then let us prove it, Alexander urged. Suspend the severance cycle. Allow currently developing species to interact without artificial boundaries. Observe the results. If chaos ensues, you can always reinstate the protocol. But if cooperation emerges naturally, he left the implication hanging. Proposal represents significant risk to established order. All meaningful growth involves risk, Alexander countered. If your goal truly is to foster optimal development, then consider that development itself requires testing new approaches when existing ones show limitations. The conservator vessels began moving again, but not in a threatening manner. They appeared to be repositioning into some kind of geometric formation above Earth.
Assessment modified, the voice announced. Human species demonstrates unanticipated cognitive parameter. Rejection of external authority despite power differential.
That's kind of our thing, Alexander said with a slight smile.
Parameter analysis indicates potential value in experimental suspension of standard protocol. Proposal under consideration by conservator consensus.
Skitter's compound eyes widened in what appeared to be shock.
They're actually considering it, he whispered. In 250 million years, no one has ever... Provisional decision, severance cycle suspended for evaluation period of 50 rotations of galactic core. Human species and hegemony designated as joint administrators of experimental protocol.
Alexander blinked in surprise. Joint administrators? With the hegemony? Complementary cognitive patterns detected. Hegemony, stability, hierarchy, preservation. Humans, adaptation, innovation, challenge. Combined administration increases probability of experimental success. Skitters seemed as stunned as Alexander felt. They want our species to work together, to demonstrate an alternative to their severance cycle?
Correct.
Gateway network will remain operational for facilitation of interspecies communication and travel.
Conservator observation will continue.
If experiment fails, standard protocol will resume. It was an unexpected outcome. Neither acceptance of the severance nor outright victory against it, but rather a challenge of a different kind. The conservators were essentially asking humanity and the hegemony to prove that diverse species could coexist and thrive without the artificial constraints they had imposed for eons.
We accept this responsibility,
Alexander said firmly, after a quick glance at Skitters, who nodded his agreement.
And we thank you for considering an alternative approach. Notification. All gateway civilizations being informed of protocol modification. Administrative interface will be provided to designated representatives of human and hegemony governance. The conservator vessels began to withdraw, their formation dispersing as they moved back toward the gateway at the edge of the solar system. The observation platforms deployed across Earth remained active, however, continuing their collection of data. Final notification. Experimental protocol does not guarantee success. Species must demonstrate capacity for cooperative existence without conservator intervention. Failure will result in reinstatement of severance. With that final message, the communication channel closed. The tactical display showed the conservator fleet departing Earth orbit, though a few vessels remained near the gateway, presumably to monitor the experiment they had just initiated. In the sudden silence of the command center, Alexander turned to find Skitters staring at him with an unreadable expression. I'm not sure whether to congratulate you or question your sanity, Commander, the insectoid said finally. You just convinced beings who have shaped galactic evolution for 250 million years to try something new. I'm not sure I believe it myself, Alexander admitted, but it seems we have a chance now, not just to avoid exile, but to create something new, a genuinely cooperative galactic community. With the hegemony as our partners, Skitters noted, antennae twitching in what might have been amusement. The same hegemony that tried to conquer Earth just months ago. Ironic, isn't it? Alexander smiled slightly. But maybe that's exactly the point. If former enemies can become administrators of a new galactic order, then perhaps diverse species truly can coexist without artificial segregation, Skitters finished. A compelling demonstration indeed. Reports were already flooding in from around the world as the news spread. The conservator assessment platforms were withdrawing from population centers, though they continued their observations from a distance. Earth's defense systems remained neutralized, a stark reminder of the power differential still at play. Admiral Zhao's face appeared on a priority channel. Commander, we're receiving transmissions from across the galaxy, from species we've never even encountered before. They're all saying the same thing. The severance has been suspended. A new administrative protocol is being implemented, and somehow, humanity is involved. Not just humanity, Alexander corrected, glancing at Skitters. We've been paired with the hegemony as joint administrators. It seems our complementary characteristics make us suitable partners for this experiment. Partners with the hegemony? Zhao looked skeptical. After everything that's happened? The conservators see value in our differences, Alexander explained. The hegemony's stability and order balanced by humanity's adaptability and willingness to challenge established systems. A formidable combination, Skitters observed, if we can overcome our recent history. As the implications continued to unfold, Alexander found himself staring at the tactical display, watching as the gateway at the edge of the solar system pulsed with energy. No longer a potential tool of exile, but instead a connection to a galaxy suddenly open in ways it hadn't been for a 250 million years. The challenge ahead was immense. Helping diverse species with different values, histories, and capabilities learn to coexist without the artificial boundaries the conservators had maintained for eons, proving that cooperation could emerge naturally without external enforcement. And doing it all alongside the very civilization that had recently tried to subjugate humanity. You know, Alexander said to Skitters as the command center buzzed with activity around them. This might actually be more difficult than fighting the hegemony was. The insectoid's mandibles clicked in what Alexander had come to recognize as laughter. Indeed, Commander. But perhaps that's exactly why the conservators chose our species for this task. You humans have a remarkable capacity for turning enemies into allies when faced with a common challenge. And the hegemony has maintained galactic stability for 12,000 years, Skitters replied. We know how to build systems that last, together. His antennae twitched thoughtfully. Together we might actually succeed where 250 million years of artificial selection has failed. Alexander nodded, a cautious optimism building within him. Then let's get to work, Ambassador. We have a galaxy to reshape. 1 year later, Alexander stood in the newly constructed Galactic Cooperation Center in Geneva, watching as representatives from 29 formerly isolated species mingled in the Grand Atrium. The conservator experiment was well underway, with the Gateway Network now serving as a means of connection rather than potential division. Quite a change from our first meeting, Skitters observed, joining him at the observation railing. When you were demanding Earth's surrender. Alexander smiled. Yes, I'd say so. The past year had been challenging, but surprisingly productive. The partnership between humanity and the hegemony had started awkwardly, with centuries of mutual suspicion to overcome. But the shared responsibility of administering the new galactic protocol had forced both species to find common ground. Earth had contributed its innovative approaches to problem-solving and its emphasis on individual rights and freedoms. The hegemony had provided its extensive experience in managing multi-species institutions and its sophisticated diplomatic frameworks. Together, they had begun creating something unprecedented, a genuinely cooperative galactic community where diverse civilizations could interact without either conquest or artificial segregation. The Arcturus delegation seems to be adapting well, Skitters noted, indicating a group of crystalline entities communicating with human and hegemony representatives through specialized interface devices. They were apparently on the exile side of the boundary in the last 3 severance cycles, Alexander replied. They're particularly grateful for the chance to rejoin the wider galactic community. As are many species. Skitter's antennae twitched thoughtfully. It's remarkable how quickly meaningful cooperation has emerged, even among civilizations with radically different biologies and cognitive frameworks. Almost as if the severance was unnecessary all along, Alexander observed. Perhaps, though I suspect the true test is still to come. The insectoid gestured subtly toward the far corner of the atrium, where a spherical conservator observation platform hovered silently. They're still watching, evaluating. 50 rotations of the galactic core may seem like a long time to us, but to them, it's barely a moment, Alexander finished. A brief experiment in a project spanning 250 million years. The conservators had maintained their presence throughout the galaxy, their massive vessels positioned near each gateway. They rarely communicated directly, preferring to observe through their platforms as the new galactic order took shape. But their message was clear. This was a provisional arrangement, subject to review and potential reversal if the experiment failed. Do you think we'll succeed? Skitters asked quietly. Truly succeed, I mean. Not just for the duration of their observation, but permanently? It was a question Alexander had asked himself many times over the past year. The challenges were enormous, helping species with fundamentally different values find ways to cooperate, preventing more aggressive civilizations from dominating others, building institutions that could adapt to the needs of wildly diverse members. I don't know, he admitted honestly. But I do know that having the freedom to try, to succeed or fail on our own terms rather than by someone else's criteria, that's valuable in itself. Whatever happens, we're shaping our own future now. Skitter's compound eyes reflected the lights of the atrium. A very human perspective. The hegemony would focus more on the stability of the outcome. And that's why we make good partners,
Alexander pointed out with a smile. Balance. Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of Dr. Eleanor Wright, now serving as Earth's chief scientific liaison to the Gateway Network Research Initiative. Commander, Ambassador, she greeted them. I thought you'd want to know. We've made a breakthrough in understanding the Gateway technology. It appears the network can be modified to access regions of space far beyond our galaxy. Intergalactic travel? Alexander's eyebrows rose in surprise. Potentially, yes, though the conservators have restricted access to those functions. Eleanor's expression grew more serious, which raises an interesting question. What are they protecting us from? Or perhaps, what are they preventing us from discovering? It was a sobering thought, that even with the severance suspended, the conservators might still be limiting the galaxy's development in ways they hadn't revealed. One challenge at a time, Doctor, Alexander suggested. Let's focus on making this experiment a success before we start exploring beyond our galaxy. As Eleanor moved away to join a group of scientists, Skitters turned back to Alexander. She raises a valid point, though. The conservators have existed for 250 million years, maintaining this cycle of severance and selection. What prompted them to create such a system in the first place? What threat or problem were they addressing? Another mystery for another day, Alexander replied, though the question lingered in his mind. For now, we have more immediate concerns. The atrium lights dimmed slightly, indicating that the day's main session was about to begin. Representatives from all 29 species began moving toward the central chamber, where the first draft of a new galactic charter would be presented. A framework for cooperation that, if successful, might eventually replace the conservators' artificial boundaries entirely. As they joined the procession, Alexander found himself thinking about the journey that had brought them here. From Earth's careful concealment of its true capabilities, to the confrontation with the hegemony, to the unexpected challenge of the conservators and their ancient cycle of judgment. Humanity had shown its teeth when threatened, revealing the power it had hidden for so long. But in the end, it wasn't Earth's weapons that had changed the galaxy's course. It was the uniquely human willingness to challenge authority, to question even the most established systems when they seemed unjust. You know, Skitters said quietly as they entered the chamber, there's a new interpretation of the prophecy circulating among our religious caste. They now suggest that the soft ones will remake the stars in their image wasn't a warning at all, but a prediction of exactly this outcome. Humans helping to reshape the galaxy into a place where diversity is valued rather than segregated. I like that interpretation, Alexander admitted, though I'd say we're remaking the stars in everyone's image, not just our own. The insectoid's antenna twitched in agreement. Indeed, a truly cooperative effort, as it should be. As the session began, with representatives from formerly isolated species coming together in unprecedented collaboration, Alexander felt a cautious optimism. The galaxy was changing, evolving beyond the artificial constraints imposed by the conservators. Whether this experiment would ultimately succeed remained to be seen, but the opportunity to try, to forge a new path based on cooperation rather than segregation, was victory enough for now. Earth had warned the galaxy it was holding back. When threatened, humanity had bared its teeth and shown its true strength. But in the end, it was neither violence nor technology that had altered the course of galactic history. It was the simple, powerful assertion that every species deserved the right to determine its own fate. A principle worth fighting for, even against beings who had shaped the galaxy for 250 million years. And as the first article of the new Galactic Charter was read aloud, all sentient species possess inherent value and the right to self-determination. Alexander knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, this moment marked the beginning of something truly revolutionary. A galaxy united not by force or fear, but by choice and mutual respect. The war without mercy had given way to peace with purpose. And the universe, for the first time in eons, faced a future unbound by the judgments of the past. Epilogue: 5 years after the conservators first emerged from their ancient gateways, the galaxy had transformed in ways few could have imagined. The Galactic Cooperation Center had expanded beyond its original scope, becoming the heart of a thriving interstellar community, where species once separated by artificial boundaries now worked together toward common goals. Alexander, now bearing the title of co-administrator alongside Skitters through Shadows, stood before the great viewing wall of the center's orbital station, watching as ships from dozens of worlds moved through the solar system in peaceful traffic patterns that would have been unthinkable just years before. The quarterly report, Skitters said, approaching with a data tablet that shimmered with holographic text in multiple languages. Trade volumes up 17%. Diplomatic incidents down to their lowest levels since the protocol began. And we've successfully mediated 3 territorial disputes without any resort to military action. Not bad for a species of primitives, Alexander noted with dry humor. Indeed, though I notice you've stopped using that term about yourselves, Skitters observed.
Growing comfortable with your place in the galactic community? Alexander considered the question seriously.
I think we're growing comfortable with the idea that there doesn't have to be a rigid hierarchy, that cooperation doesn't require any species to be lesser or greater, just different.
A lesson the hegemony is still learning, Skitters admitted.
Though we're making progress. The younger generations especially seem to embrace the new paradigm. Through the viewing wall, they could see one of the conservator observation platforms maintaining its silent vigil near the gateway. The ancient entities had said little since the experiment began, but their continued presence was a constant reminder that this new freedom came with responsibilities.
Any word from the monitoring stations about their assessment? Alexander asked.
Nothing concrete, but the patterns suggest curiosity. Their observation intensity has actually increased in recent months, as if they're studying phenomena they didn't expect to see.
Such as?
Spontaneous cooperation between species with no prior contact. Technological innovations emerging from collaborative research. Cultural syntheses that create entirely new forms of art and philosophy. Skitter's antennae twitched in what might have been amusement.
Things that don't fit neatly into their models of optimal development.
Alexander smiled.
Maybe that's the point. Maybe optimal development isn't something you can plan or control. Maybe it just emerges. A very human observation, Skitters noted, and perhaps exactly why the conservators chose your species for this experiment.
Their conversation was interrupted by an alert from the communications station. Dr. Wright's face appeared on the main screen, her expression mixing excitement with concern.
Commander, Ambassador, we've detected something unusual.
The conservator platforms are transmitting on frequencies we've never recorded before, and they're not alone.
Clarify, Alexander requested.
We're detecting response signals from outside the galaxy, very faint, but definitely artificial. It appears the conservators are communicating with something else. Alexander and Skitters exchanged glances. The mystery of what lay beyond the galaxy's boundaries, what the conservators might be protecting them from, or preventing them from discovering, remained unsolved.
Any indication of the content? Skitters asked.
Impossible to decode with current technology. But the transmission patterns suggest a report, as if they're updating external entities on the progress of the experiment.
The experiment being us, Alexander murmured.
Indeed, which raises the question, who are they reporting to? And what will happen when the experimental period ends? It was a sobering reminder that despite their success in creating a new galactic order, humanity and its partners were still operating within constraints they didn't fully understand. The conservators had granted them freedom to try a new approach, but that freedom was conditional and temporary.
One challenge at a time,
Alexander said, echoing words he'd spoken many times over the past year.
We'll deal with whatever comes next when it comes. For now, we focus on proving that cooperation works.
And if it doesn't? Skitters asked quietly. If we fail to meet their criteria for success? Alexander turned back to the viewing wall, watching as a human research vessel rendezvoused with a hegemony exploration ship, their crews working together to investigate an anomalous signal from the galactic rim. It was a scene that would have been impossible under the old system of artificial separation.
Then at least we'll fail on our own terms, he said finally. We'll have tried something new, learned something valuable, and left the galaxy a little different than we found it. A very human way of looking at failure, Skitters observed.
Maybe, but it's also a very galactic way of looking at it now, Alexander replied. Because that attitude, that willingness to try new things and learn from the results, it's spreading. Species that had never questioned the old order are now asking why things have to be done certain ways. They're experimenting with new forms of government, new approaches to science, new ways of relating to each other.
The transformation you spoke of, Skitters said, understanding.
Not just political or technological, but fundamental. A change in how an entire galaxy thinks about itself.
Exactly.
And that kind of change, that doesn't get undone easily. Even if the conservators decide to reinstate their old system, the ideas will remain. The knowledge that cooperation is possible,
that diversity is strength, that every species has something valuable to contribute. As if summoned by their conversation, one of the conservator platforms drifted closer to the viewing wall, its sensors scanning the station with what seemed like intense interest. For a moment, Alexander could almost imagine that the ancient intelligence behind those sensors was curious about what it observed, perhaps even surprised by outcomes it hadn't predicted. "You know what I think?" Alexander said, watching the platform hover just beyond the transparent barrier. "I think we've already succeeded. Not in their terms or our terms, but in terms that didn't exist before we started. We've created something new. Not perfect, not permanent, but genuinely new. And that itself is a kind of victory. Even if it only lasts 50 galactic rotations. Even if it only lasts 5 more years," Alexander confirmed. "Because ideas, once released, have a way of surviving even when the systems that created them don't." The conservator platform completed its scan and drifted away, rejoining its fellows in their eternal vigil. But for the first time since the experiment began, Alexander found himself thinking of them not as judges or overseers, but as observers, witnesses to something they had never seen before in their 250 years of galactic management. The emergence of true cooperation, the development of genuine community, the evolution of a galaxy that had learned to value diversity over uniformity, growth over stagnation, hope over fear. Whatever the future held, whatever challenges lay beyond the experimental period, this moment, this achievement, would remain. A galaxy had dared to try something new, and in doing so had discovered what it might become. Earth had warned the galaxy it was holding back. When threatened, humanity had shown its true strength. But in the end, the greatest victory wasn't military or technological. It was philosophical. The simple but revolutionary idea that the future belonged not to the strongest or the oldest or the most advanced, but to those willing to work together towards something better. The war without mercy had given way to peace with purpose, and the universe, for the first time in eons, faced a future limited only by the collective imagination of its inhabitants. As Alexander watched ships from dozens of worlds navigate the space lanes around Earth, former enemies now partners, strangers now friends, he smiled. Whatever the conservators ultimately decided about their experiment, the galaxy would never be quite the same. And that, perhaps, was the most human victory of all. The end.